If the legends of Bigfoot, skinwalkers, and creatures beyond comprehension fascinate you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Give this video a like if you believe there's more out there than what the world wants us to know. The radio crackled to life as another distress call came through. Static filled the small cabin, bouncing off wooden walls that had witnessed decades of isolation. My third winter as a park ranger in the Denali wilderness was proving to be the harshest yet. "Coda here," I responded, using my ranger handle. My birth name was Joseph Running Waters, but most people knew me by Coda, an old Lakota name meaning friend that my grandfather had given me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Out here, friends were scarce. "We've got hikers missing near Blackwater Lake," the dispatcher's voice fought through the interference. "Last contact was yesterday afternoon. They missed 2 check-ins." I grabbed my topographical map, locating the area. Blackwater Lake sat in one of the most remote sections of the park, a 3-hour snowmobile ride from my cabin. The area was notorious for its unpredictable weather and the dense forest that surrounded it like nature's prison walls. "Temperatures dropping fast," I noted, glancing at the old thermometer mounted outside my window. "I'll head out at first light." That night, as wind howled through the trees surrounding my cabin, I remembered why I'd taken this job 5 years ago. After 2 tours in Afghanistan and the subsequent collapse of my marriage, I craved isolation. The wilderness offered simplicity and distance from a world that had left me hollow. My grandfather, full-blooded Tlingit and a former ranger himself, had encouraged me to reconnect with the land. "The forest will heal you," he'd said before passing. His weathered face had been serious when he added, "But respect what walks there. Not all paths should be followed." I dismissed his warnings as the superstitions of an old man. The native stories, creatures in the woods, spirits in the mountains, were just tales to scare children away from wandering too far. At least that's what I believed then. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, dreams of footprints in snow too large to belong to any recognized species, deep impressions, as if made by something impossibly heavy. I woke repeatedly, the sensation of being watched seeping through the cabin walls. Dawn arrived with unforgiving cold. I loaded my snowmobile with emergency supplies, first aid kit, thermal blankets, rations, flares, and my rifle. Standard procedure for a rescue operation, though something urged me to pack extra ammunition. Just a precaution, I told myself. The journey to Blackwater Lake was brutal. Snow had fallen heavily overnight, and the temperature had plummeted to 30 below. My face mask froze with each exhaled breath, creating a crystalline shell that I had to break periodically to keep my vision clear. The lake appeared after cresting a ridge, a black mirror surrounded by towering pines weighted with snow. No movement disturbed its surface. No smoke from a campfire indicated the presence of survivors. I parked the snowmobile and unloaded my gear. The silence was absolute, the kind that makes your ears ache searching for sound. Fresh snow meant tracking would be easier, but it also meant any prints from yesterday would be buried. The coordinates pointed to the north shore. I trudged through knee-deep snow, scanning for any sign of disturbance. 200 yards in, I found the first anomaly, a pine tree with its bark stripped clean about 8 feet up the trunk. Too high for a bear, too methodical for weather damage. Behind it lay a torn backpack, high-end gear, the kind serious hikers invest in. Its contents were scattered as if it had been systematically searched. Food packets had been ripped open, their contents gone. A journal lay nearby, its pages fluttering in the gentle breeze. I picked it up, brushing away snow. The handwriting was neat, methodical, belonging to someone named Gregory. The entries documented a hiking trip with his friend Anton. The final entry sent chills through me despite my thermal gear. "Something's following us. Anton thinks it's a bear, but bears don't mimic human voices." It called my name last night from the darkness. How did it know my name? "We're leaving at first light." Below this was a hasty addendum, the handwriting now jagged with fear. "It's standing at the tree line watching us. Bigger than anything I've ever seen. Not a bear, not anything I recognize. If anyone finds this..." The entry ended there. I stowed the journal in my pack and continued searching. The snow held no footprints, but something had moved through here. Broken branches and disturbed snow created a chaotic path leading away from the lake and deeper into the forest. As the short winter day began fading to dusk, I found their tent, or what remained of it. The reinforced fabric had been torn apart, aluminum poles bent at impossible angles. No human possesses strength to twist metal poles like they were twigs. The scene suggested violence, yet I found no blood. Just 2 empty sleeping bags and personal items scattered as if thrown aside in haste. Their satellite phone lay smashed beyond repair. As darkness approached, I faced a decision: make camp in this disturbed area or return to my snowmobile in safety. Professional obligation demanded I continue the search, but something more primal urged retreat. The wind changed direction, carrying a scent that stopped my breath. The unmistakable musk of something wild mixed with the sickly sweet odor of decay. And then came the sound, a low moan that seemed to vibrate the very air around me, neither fully animal nor human. I unholstered my rifle, scanning the darkening forest. The trees suddenly seemed like sentinels watching my every move, their branches reaching toward me like grasping hands. "Gregory, Anton," I called, knowing it was a risk but obligated to try. My voice echoed across the lake, bouncing back as if rejected by the wilderness. Then, impossibly, I heard my name whispered from the shadows to my right. Not my ranger handle, my birth name. Joseph. The voice was rough, as if forcing sounds through a throat not designed for human speech. I swung my rifle toward the sound, but saw only darkness between the trees. Night was coming. I needed shelter. Against every instinct, I began setting up my emergency tent near the ruined campsite, calculating that whatever had destroyed the hikers' camp had likely moved on with its prey. As I hammered the last stake into the frozen ground, I noticed the silence had deepened. No wind, no distant cry of wolves. Nothing. The forest held its breath. I crawled into my tent, rifle beside me, and waited for the longest night of my life to pass. Morning arrived with reluctant light filtering through dense clouds. I emerged from my tent, rifle first, scanning the perimeter. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering any tracks, if there had been any. But the silence remained unnatural, as if the forest creatures knew to avoid this place. I packed quickly and continued my search, moving in widening circles from the destroyed campsite. The weight of being watched pressed down on me, though each time I turned, the feeling shifted to a different direction. Always behind me, never allowing a glimpse. My radio produced only static when I attempted to update dispatch. The mountains often blocked signals, but the complete absence of communication intensified my isolation. I was truly alone out here with whatever stalked these woods. By midday, I found the first definitive evidence something was wrong. A pine tree, easily 100 years old, had been uprooted and laid across a game trail. Not fallen naturally, deliberately placed as an obstacle or a warning. The root system was massive, requiring tremendous force to tear from the ground. Beyond this barricade lay prints in the snow, not human tracks, but not identifiable as any known wildlife either. Massive impressions nearly 18 inches long, with what appeared to be 5 distinct toe marks. The stride length between them measured over 6 feet, indicating something of impossible size moving upright. My ranger training included identifying every mammal species in Alaska. These tracks matched nothing in that knowledge base. They reminded me of the stories my grandfather would tell about the Kushtaka, the land otter men of Tlingit legend who lured people into the forest, or the more widespread tales of Sasquatch. I photographed the tracks with my digital camera, though something told me these images would never reach my colleagues. The feeling of wrongness intensified with each step I took following the trail. The tracks led to a rocky outcropping overlooking a ravine. The snow here was disturbed in a large circle, as if something had paced while observing the valley below. A vantage point. A hunting spot. A glint of metal caught my eye. Wedged between 2 rocks was a watch, expensive, still ticking. The backpackers carried high-end gear. This might have belonged to one of them. More disturbing was how it had been placed, not dropped, deliberately positioned where someone searching might find it. I pocketed the watch and continued following the massive tracks. They led deeper into the forest, away from any marked trails or known campsites. The trees grew denser here, old-growth forest untouched for centuries. Moss hung from branches, creating a canopy that further dimmed the already weak winter light. After another mile, I found a clearing. The sight stopped me cold. Multiple trees had been broken, not cut but snapped halfway up their trunks, and arranged in a rough circle. In the center lay a pile of branches forming what appeared to be a crude shelter or nest. My approach was cautious, every sense heightened. The nest structure was large enough to accommodate something 8 to 10 feet tall. Around it were small objects, a boot, tent stakes, a compass, a shredded map, items that once belonged to hikers. I counted remnants from what must have been at least 5 different hiking parties. This thing had been collecting trophies. The hikers I was searching for were just the latest targets. As I knelt to examine the shelter, a cracking sound came from the forest behind me. I whirled around, rifle ready, but saw only trees and shadows. Then another crack, from a different direction, and another. The sounds encircled me, as if multiple assailants were converging. I backed toward the center of the clearing, providing a 360-degree field of fire. My breathing came in short bursts, visible in the frigid air. The forest had gone silent again, except for those deliberate cracks. Something breaking branches not by accident but as communication. Or intimidation. Then came a howl that froze my insides. Not the familiar cry of a wolf, but something that mimicked it while getting the harmonics wrong. The sound modulated in a way that suggested intelligence behind it. I fired a warning shot into the air. The forest fell silent for 3 heartbeats, then erupted with howls from multiple directions. They were answering my challenge, or calling reinforcements. Survival instinct took over. I ran, not toward my snowmobile, they stood between me and it, but toward the lake. Water offered visibility, prevented ambush from behind. If I could cross the frozen surface, I might circle back to my vehicle. The forest seemed to clutch at me as I fled, branches slapping my face, roots rising to trip my feet. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, heavy footfalls crushing underbrush, breathing that wasn't entirely animal. I broke through the tree line onto the lake's shore, lungs burning from exertion and cold. The lake stretched before me, its surface frozen solid. I stepped onto the ice and moved toward the center, constantly looking back. That's when I saw it, emerging from the trees where I had just exited. Even at 200 yards, its size was undeniable, standing fully upright at what must have been 9 feet tall, covered in dark matted fur, with disproportionately long arms hanging past its knees. Its face remained in shadow, but I could make out the massive breadth of its shoulders and chest. It didn't rush toward me. Instead, it paced at the shoreline, occasionally dropping to all fours before rising again. Assessing, planning. I raised my rifle and centered the scope on its chest. My finger tensed on the trigger, but a voice deep inside held me back. This creature existed outside scientific classification. Killing it would destroy evidence of something incredible. While I hesitated, it lifted its head and released another howl. The sound carried across the frozen lake, echoing off the surrounding mountains. Message sent, it melted back into the forest darkness. I remained rooted on the ice, rifle still raised, for nearly 10 minutes. Nothing further emerged from the tree line. The encounter felt like both warning and promise. It was letting me leave. For now. The sun was setting as I cautiously circled the lake to reach my snowmobile. The machine appeared untouched, though I noted fresh tracks around it, the same massive prints, suggesting the creature had investigated my vehicle before moving on. I should have left immediately. Protocol demanded I return to base, report findings, and organize a larger search party. But the missing hikers were still out there, if they lived, and now I knew there was something else hunting them. I made camp a quarter-mile from my snowmobile, selecting a defensible position with clear sightlines. Sleep would not come easy, but I needed rest before continuing the search at dawn. As darkness settled fully over the forest, the sounds began again, wood knocking against wood, rocks clacking together, and occasional howls more distant than before. Communication between multiple creatures creating a perimeter around me. I sat with my back against a boulder, rifle across my knees, watching the darkness and remembering my grandfather's words. They've walked these forests since before our people came. They don't want to be found, but sometimes they find you first. Dawn revealed a landscape transformed. During the night, the temperature had plunged further, coating the forest in crystalline frost that amplified the weak morning light. Beautiful, if not for the knowledge of what waited in those glittering trees. I broke camp quickly, leaving minimal trace of my presence. The wood-knocking sounds had stopped around midnight, but that offered little comfort. The feeling of being observed had only intensified. My plan was to circle back to the destroyed nest site and track outward. If the hikers had been taken there initially, I might find signs of where they were moved. The rational part of my mind knew the chances of finding them alive diminished with each passing hour in these temperatures. The less rational part wondered if death might be preferable to capture by these creatures. The snowmobile roared to life, shattering the morning silence. I navigated through the trees toward the clearing, keeping my speed moderate to avoid accidents. The machine felt comforting, a connection to civilization, to human technology. I parked half a mile from the clearing and continued on foot, moving with the quiet caution my military training had instilled. The forest remained unnaturally silent. No birds, no small mammals. Even the usual creaking of trees in the wind seemed muted. The nest site appeared unchanged from yesterday, but closer inspection revealed subtle differences. The arrangement of objects had shifted slightly. Something had returned overnight and rearranged its collection. I searched for the watch I'd found yesterday. It was now prominently displayed atop a pile of torn fabric. A message. It knew I had touched its things. It wanted me to know. I circled the site, searching for tracks leaving the area. The snow revealed multiple paths, large prints that could belong to our mysterious predator, but also dragging marks that suggested something heavy being pulled away. I chose the freshest trail and followed, moving parallel to the tracks rather than directly in them. The path led upward toward higher elevation and rockier terrain. Tactical disadvantage for me, the snowmobile would be useless on such ground, and the rocks would provide countless hiding spots for ambush. After an hour of careful progress, the forest began to thin. The tracks led toward a cliff face interrupted by dark recesses, caves or rock shelters, perfect denning sites, protected from weather and easily defensible. I paused to consider my options. Entering potential den sites violated every survival instinct. But those missing hikers might be inside, possibly alive. My duty was clear, however suicidal it felt. I approached the nearest cave entrance, rifle ready. The opening was roughly circular, about 7 feet in diameter, large enough for something substantial to pass through comfortably. Tracks confirmed this was the correct location. Multiple sets of the large footprints converged here. The beam of my flashlight penetrated perhaps 20 feet before darkness swallowed it. The cave entrance sloped downward into the earth. A damp, musky odor wafted outward. The same scent I'd detected near the destroyed campsite, only stronger. Underneath it lay another smell, the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. "Gregory? Anton?" I called, my voice echoing into the darkness. No human response came, but something stirred deep within, a shuffling movement followed by a low grunt. I took a tentative step inside, then another. The temperature rose noticeably as I descended. These caves likely connected to geothermal features that kept them warmer than the surface, ideal shelter during Alaska's brutal winters. 20 feet in, the passageway widened into a chamber roughly 30 feet across. My light revealed walls covered with crude markings, lines, circles, handprints made in what appeared to be dark pigment. Not random markings, but deliberate patterns repeating around the space. The floor was covered with branches, grass, and, more disturbing, scraps of modern fabrics. Sleeping bags, tent material, clothing. Evidence of dozens of victims over what must have been many years. A sound from deeper in the cave system froze me in place. A whimper, distinctly human. "Hello?" I called, keeping my voice low. "Rangers, I'm here to help." Another whimper, followed by what sounded like a hand slapping against stone. I advanced cautiously toward a narrow passage leading from the main chamber. The hair on my neck stood on end. Every instinct screamed against going deeper, becoming more trapped. The passage opened into a smaller room. My light caught movement, a human form pressed against the far wall. Male, bearded, clothes torn, eyes wide with terror. "Anton?" I ventured. The man nodded frantically, then pointed behind me. I spun just as something massive filled the passage I'd entered through. It moved with a fluid grace that defied its size. In the confined space, it hunched forward, but still stood well over 7 feet tall. My light illuminated matted fur, dark and oily against powerful muscle. Its face remained in shadow, but I glimpsed eyes reflecting the light. Amber, intelligent, fixed on mine. I raised my rifle but hesitated. The creature made no aggressive move. Instead, it tilted its head, studying me with unsettling focus. "Back up," I commanded, as if speaking to a bear during ranger training. "Back away now." To my shock, it responded, not by retreating, but by mimicking my words in a grotesque approximation of my voice. "Back up, back away now." The words emerged, guttural, distorted, but recognizable, a perfect demonstration of its intelligence, and why hikers reported hearing their names called from the darkness. Anton whimpered again behind me. I maintained eye contact with the creature, slowly reaching back with one hand. "Come toward me," I told Anton. Slowly. The creature's head snapped toward Anton when he moved, a low growl emanating from its chest. Its posture shifted subtly, weight transferring forward. I fired a shot into the ceiling of the cave. The thunder of the rifle in the enclosed space was deafening. Rock fragments showered down as the creature recoiled, covering its ears with massive hands, another startlingly human gesture. "Run!" I shouted to Anton, shoving him toward the passage. "Get to the entrance!" We fled as the creature's roar shook the cave behind us. The sound was answered by distant calls, others of its kind, alerted to the disturbance. We emerged into daylight, Anton stumbling in weakened exhaustion. I half-carried him toward where I'd left the snowmobile, looking back to see dark shapes emerging from multiple cave entrances along the ridge. "Gregory," Anton gasped as we ran. "They took Gregory deeper in. He's still alive." The revelation hit like physical pain. One saved, one left behind. An impossible choice loomed: attempt a rescue against multiple creatures in their den system, or escape with the survivor I'd found. The decision was made for me as more howls echoed through the forest. They were mobilizing, cutting off routes back to the cave system. At least 4 distinct voices called to each other, coordinating. We reached the snowmobile and I fired it up, pulling Anton onto the seat behind me. His grip was weak. Without prompt rescue, he wouldn't survive much longer in his condition. "Hold tight," I ordered, opening the throttle. We tore through the forest as shadows moved between trees on either side. They paralleled our course, keeping pace despite the snowmobile's speed. Physically impossible, yet I witnessed it. Dark shapes bounding on all fours, then rising to bipedal stance to navigate obstacles. One creature cut diagonally across our path, forcing me to swerve violently. The snowmobile fishtailed, nearly throwing us before I regained control. The maneuver cost us momentum. They were hurting us, I realized, directing our escape route. We broke from the tree line near Blackwater Lake, the expanse of ice offering our clearest path to safety. I gunned the engine, pushing the machine to its limits across the frozen surface. Behind us, 3 creatures emerged from the forest. Unlike before, they made no attempt to hide. Standing at their full height, they watched our escape. No pursuit, no need. They'd accomplished their goal of driving us from their territory while keeping one hostage. The largest creature, the one from the cave, stepped forward to the edge of the ice. In its massive hand, it held something small that caught the light. Gregory's watch, a trophy. A message that they kept what they chose to keep. As we reached the far shore and re-entered the forest, Anton's grip weakened further. I called dispatch on the radio, finally getting a clear signal now that we'd left the electromagnetic dead zone surrounding Blackwater Lake. Evacuation coordinates established, emergency protocols initiated. Anton slipped in and out of consciousness during the journey to the extraction point. His limited statements painted a horrifying picture. 3 days held in the caves, watching as the creatures studied them, mimicked their speech, took Gregory deeper into the cave system after he'd tried to fight back. The extraction team met us at the rendezvous coordinates: paramedics, additional rangers, and state troopers. Medical evacuation for Anton was immediate. My debriefing was thorough, but not entirely truthful. I reported finding 1 survivor, signs of animal predation, potentially bears. I omitted the impossible things I'd witnessed. The search for Gregory was officially suspended due to adverse conditions and wildlife danger. Privately, senior rangers informed me that recovery operations would resume in spring. We all understood we were recovering a body, not saving a life. That night, back in my cabin, I pored over my grandfather's journals. His careful documentation of Tlingit legends included entire sections about the forest beings, creatures that walked like men but were not men, that collected objects from those who trespassed in their domain, that could speak in human voices to lure the unwary. Outside my window, beyond the pool of light cast by my cabin, the forest waited, Though miles from Blackwater Lake, I felt watched, known. The wilderness had shown me its secret, and now I was marked by that knowledge. My radio crackled with static, then cleared. Through the speaker came a voice, not dispatch, not any ranger I knew. A rough approximation of human speech forming words I recognized as my own from the cave. Back up, back away now. I switched off the radio. In the sudden silence, a knocking sound came from the darkness outside. Wood against wood, a language older than words. Spring came to Denali with reluctant warmth. Snow retreated up the mountainsides, and the forest floor emerged from its winter blanket. Life returned. Birds nesting, bears emerging from hibernation, moose calves taking their first awkward steps. I remained at my post despite offers of transfer to more populous areas. My superiors were concerned. The Blackwater Lake incident had changed me. My reports grew sparse, my interactions with fellow rangers minimal. I'd become obsessed with the unexplained, spending off-duty hours researching similar encounters across Alaska's wilderness. Anton had recovered physically, but refused to return to Alaska to assist with the search for Gregory. His official statement attributed their ordeal to a bear attack, memory compromised by trauma and hypothermia. Privately, in late-night phone calls thick with alcohol and fear, he asked questions I couldn't answer about what we'd seen. "Do you think they're still watching you?" he asked during our last conversation. "Yes," I answered simply. The spring search operation found nothing. No body, no additional evidence. Blackwater Lake kept its secrets beneath summer waters that had been winter ice during my encounter. The cave system, when located and explored by a professional team, showed signs of recent occupancy, but no current inhabitants. The markings I'd described on the walls were dismissed as mineral staining. Case closed. Just another wilderness tragedy. Gregory's family eventually held a memorial service without a body to bury. I requested permanent assignment to the Blackwater region, raising eyebrows but receiving approval due to staffing shortages. My cabin, a different one, closer to the lake, became a research station of sorts. Maps covered the walls, marking similar disappearances throughout the area's history. Red pins clustered around certain regions, forming patterns invisible to those unwilling to see. Summer brought tourists and hikers, keeping me legitimately occupied with routine ranger duties. I warned everyone away from certain areas, marking trails closed due to environmental concerns. Most listened. Those who didn't received escort out of restricted zones, sometimes with me fabricating wildlife sightings to ensure compliance. I became the weird ranger, the one others joked about at headquarters. The guy who jumped at shadows and reported equipment malfunctions near certain coordinates, the one who requested extra ammunition without clear justification. Autumn painted the forest in fire colors before stripping the trees bare. The lake's surface reflected cloud movements like a living mirror. Silence returned as wildlife prepared for the coming cold. That's when the knocking began again, wood against wood, from the ridgeline above my cabin. Always at dusk, always three distinct patterns repeated in sequence. Communication, calling. Not threatening, but persistent. I never answered, never acknowledged. But I listened every evening, documenting the changes in location and frequency. They were establishing boundaries, I realized. This clearing, this cabin, this human, tolerated. The rest of the territories near the lake, claimed. Winter descended, harsh and absolute. The lake froze solid once more. Trees cracked in the extreme cold, and the aurora danced overhead on clear nights. My responsibilities diminished with the visitor count, leaving long hours for contemplation and observation. The anniversary of the Blackwater incident approached. I decided to return to the cave system while the forest stood locked in winter's grip. Not a sanctioned operation, a personal quest for understanding. The night before my planned expedition, a storm rolled in. Wind howled around my cabin, rattling windows and driving snow through the smallest gaps in the structure. The temperature plummeted to 40 below. Even the knocking sounds were silenced by nature's fury. I sat before the wood stove, reviewing maps and equipment lists, when something heavy landed on my porch. Not snow sliding from the roof, a deliberate weight. Footsteps followed, crossing wooden planks designed to creak as warning against bears. My rifle was in hand before I consciously reached for it. I moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Swirling snow obscured vision beyond a few feet, but something large moved in the darkness. a shadow among shadows, standing upright despite the gale-force winds. A knock came at my door. Not wood against wood this time, but knuckles against frame. 3 distinct patterns, the same as I'd heard from the forest. I stood frozen, rifle trained on the door, mind racing through scenarios. They'd never approached structures before, never directly engaged beyond that first encounter in the cave. This represented an escalation I wasn't prepared for. The knock repeated, more forcefully. The door shuddered in its frame. "What do you want?" I called, voice steady despite the thunder of my pulse. Silence followed, then a response in that unsettling approximation of human speech. "Joseph." My name in its mouth felt like violation. This wasn't random. It had tracked me specifically, remembered me, sought me out. Another sound followed, a metallic tapping against the door, something small and hard being used as a tool. Against all reason, I approached the door. Through the window, I could make out a massive shape on my porch, hunched to fit under the roof. It held something that glinted dully in the faint light spilling from my windows. The rational course was to radio for emergency evacuation, to barricade myself until help arrived, to treat this as the threat it clearly was. Instead, I unlatched the door and opened it a crack, rifle still ready. Cold air rushed in, carrying the now familiar musky odor. Snow swirled around the massive figure looming just beyond my threshold. Its face remained in shadow, but I could see steam rising from its breath in the frigid air. Its arm extended slowly, hand opening to reveal its offering, Gregory's watch, not a trophy this time, a return, an exchange. The creature stepped back, maintaining what I suddenly understood was a respectful distance. It had not come to threaten, but to communicate. "Gregory," I said, the question obvious. It made a low sound, not quite a word, but an acknowledgement. Then it extended its massive arm, pointing beyond my cabin toward the lake, toward the caves beyond. Understanding crystallized. The coming storm had driven it from its winter shelter. It needed somewhere safe until the blizzard passed. It offered information about Gregory in exchange for temporary sanctuary. Every scientific and survival instinct rejected the notion. Yet something deeper, perhaps the same instinct my grandfather had cultivated through Tlingit tradition, recognized the moment's significance. I stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "Enter," I said simply. The creature ducked to pass through the doorframe, its massive form seeming to fill my cabin entirely. Up close, I could see details previously obscured, the intricate patterns in its fur, the unsettlingly human-like hands with opposable thumbs, the eyes that reflected intelligence and wariness in equal measure. It settled awkwardly on the floor, too large for any of my furniture, watching me with unwavering attention. I maintained distance, rifle still in hand but no longer aimed directly. Hours passed in this strange standoff. The storm raged outside while we studied each other in silence. Occasionally, it would make sounds, not attempts at speech, but complicated vocalizations clearly conveying meaning in some language beyond my comprehension. Near dawn, the storm began to subside. The creature stirred, rising to its full height, head brushing my ceiling. It moved to the door with surprising grace for its bulk. Before leaving, it placed something else on my table, a torn piece of fabric that I recognized from Gregory's jacket. It bore marks, not random tears, but deliberate patterns similar to those I'd seen in the cave. A map, I realized. A location. The creature departed without further interaction, vanishing into the snow-laden forest before full light revealed the day. I stood in the doorway watching its tracks, evidence that would soon be covered by fresh snowfall, as if the night's events existed only in imagination. But I held Gregory's watch and the marked fabric. Tangible proof of contact, of communication, of some understanding reached across an impossible divide. The map led to a different cave system, one not documented in official park records. I found Gregory there 3 days later, not alive, not truly dead, but transformed in ways that defied explanation. His eyes held recognition when they saw me, but the sounds from his throat were not human language. The official report listed him as recovered deceased, cause of death exposure, and animal predation. His family received closure of a sort. I received nightmares and questions without answers. I remain at Blackwater Lake, serving as both ranger and gatekeeper. I guide hikers away from certain areas, enforce boundaries established through unspoken agreement. Sometimes at dusk, I answer the knocking from the forest with patterns of my own. 3 distinct sequences that acknowledge territories and truces. The forest keeps its secrets. I keep mine. And on winter nights when the aurora dances overhead, shadows move between the trees. Neither fully animal nor human, but ancient beyond reckoning. Watching, waiting, remembering. In those moments I understand what my grandfather meant. The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it, and to the things that walked here first. The wilderness preserves balance through fear. I am its instrument now, as much as the creatures that claimed Gregory. My warning to you is simple. Respect boundaries, stay on marked trails, and if you hear your name called from darkness, never ever answer. The air was crisp that morning, but I wasn't thinking much about it. I had bigger things to worry about than the weather. My rig had been giving me trouble for weeks. Every time I tried to get the brakes checked, the shop was full, or I was too far from a decent mechanic to even bother. My name's Lyle Brennan, by the way. I've been a long-haul trucker for most of my life, 20 years behind the wheel. It's the kind of work that either breaks you or makes you immune to everything. Maybe a bit of both in my case. That morning in Elko, I should have listened to my gut and waited another day. The rig's brake lines had been seeping fluid for the past 800 miles, leaving small puddles of warning whenever I'd park for more than a few hours. But the schedule was tight, and the company had been riding my ass about delivery times. 20 years of perfect records buys you exactly nothing in this business when you start slipping. One more haul, I muttered to myself, checking the straps on my load one final time before climbing into the cab. Get to Salt Lake, get this fixed proper. I'd been running the same routes for years, mostly I-80 across Nevada into Utah. But there was a shortcut I'd been hearing about from some of the other drivers, a network of county roads cutting through the northeastern corner of Nevada that could shave nearly 3 hours off the trip. The company GPS didn't even recognize it as a viable route, which was precisely why some drivers preferred it. No way stations, no highway patrol, just open road. My dispatcher, Marge, had called me the night before. "Lyle, we need this delivery in Salt Lake by tomorrow afternoon," she'd said, her voice carrying that edge of urgency that meant someone higher up was breathing down her neck. "Marge, I've got to get these brakes looked at. They're not right." "Can they make it to Salt Lake?" I'd hesitated. "Probably." "Then get it fixed there. We've got a contract shop that can take you as soon as you deliver." I should have pushed back harder. 20 years of driving, and I'd never had a major accident. That's because I listened to my rig like it was talking to me, and right now it was screaming. As I pulled out of Elko just after dawn, the eastern sky was painted in shades of crimson that bled into deep purple. My grandfather would have called it a blood sky. "Red sky in morning, sailors take warning," he used to say. I wasn't a sailor, but the warning applied all the same. I was on a run through northeastern Nevada, a stretch of back roads that felt more like no man's land than part of the United States. This route was more desolate than I preferred, but it shaved hours off my usual haul time to Salt Lake. Besides, I liked the solitude. No four-wheelers tailgating me or cops lying in wait to catch me a mile or two over the limit. Just me and my rig, keeping steady along roads few others dared to take. The landscape out here was all sage and dust, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings that thrust up from the earth like the spines of buried giants. Cell service was spotty at best, non-existent at worst. I kept the CB radio on, though it had been hours since I'd heard another trucker's voice crackle through. Around mid-morning, I passed the remains of what might have once been a mining town. Nothing left now but a few crumbling wood structures barely standing against the endless assault of desert winds. Places like this had stories, dark ones usually. Men coming to seek their fortune, finding only hardship and death. The desert was good at keeping secrets. The brake pedal felt spongier with every mile. I was compensating by downshifting earlier, using the engine to slow my momentum rather than relying on the failing brake system. It wasn't ideal, but it would get me through. By 11:30, my eyelids were getting heavy. I hadn't slept well the night before. Dreams filled with endless roads and shadowy figures standing in my headlights. I cracked the window, letting the cool air blast my face, and reached for my thermos of coffee. That's when I noticed the side mirror, showing a wisp of smoke trailing from beneath my trailer. "Damn it," I muttered, easing the rig onto the shoulder. The brakes were overheating. I needed to let them cool before they failed completely. I climbed down from the cab, the silence of the desert enveloping me immediately. No birds, no insects, nothing but the ticking of my engine cooling in the dry air. I walked around the rig, checking the wheels and brake assemblies. The rear driver's side was hot enough that I could feel the heat radiating before I even got close. As I was inspecting the damage, a sound caught my attention, the distant rumble of an engine. Out here, any sign of another vehicle was notable. I straightened up, squinting down the road toward a dust cloud approaching from the direction I'd come from. The vehicle slowed as it neared, an old Chevy sedan, once blue but now faded to the color of a bruise. It pulled over about 50 yards behind my rig, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. I watched, hand instinctively moving to the pocket knife I kept in my jeans, as a tall figure emerged from the car. Even from this distance, something about the way the man moved sent a chill through me. Too fluid, too deliberate, like a predator. The day had been smooth enough until I noticed the first sign of trouble. Around noon, I saw an old beat-up sedan on the side of the road. The hood was up, and a figure was crouched near the engine, tinkering with something. Normally, I wouldn't stop. Bad experiences with strangers on the road have taught me to keep moving. But there was something different about this one. Couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the desperation in the way he moved, or the fact that I hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. The truth was, after checking my rig's brakes and letting them cool for about 30 minutes, I'd continued down the road. The Chevy sedan had passed me while I was stopped and disappeared over the horizon. Now, about 10 miles later, here it was again. Hood up, driver apparently stranded. I slowed the truck, debating whether to stop. 20 years on the road had taught me caution. I'd seen too many scams, people pretending to be broken down, then robbing whoever was kind enough to stop. But out here, in this desolation, the nearest town was at least 60 miles away in either direction. If I left him, he might not survive. I killed the engine and climbed down from the cab, trying to keep my expression neutral. I could hear the hum of insects in the dry heat, the kind that makes everything else feel eerily silent. "Need some help?" I called out, approaching cautiously. The man stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that was already stained beyond saving. He was tall, but gaunt. His clothes hung loose on his frame like he'd been living out of that car for a while. His face was sunburned, and he had the kind of beard that suggested he hadn't shaved in weeks. "I'd appreciate it," he said. His voice was raspy, like he hadn't had a drink of water in days. "Car won't start, and I'm out of options." I walked over to the engine and gave it a once-over. I'm no mechanic, but I've been around trucks long enough to know when an engine's gone to hell. Something struck me as odd, though. The distributor cap was missing, and there were wires disconnected that no one would accidentally pull loose. "What's your name?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational as I reconnected a wire that had no business being disconnected. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. "Martin? Martin Grice." I nodded, not showing that I'd noticed his pause. "Lyle Brennan," I replied, gesturing vaguely toward my rig. "What brings you out this way, Martin? Not exactly a tourist route." His eyes, pale blue and unnaturally alert, flicked to my truck, then back to me. "Just passing through, heading to Salt Lake for work." I fiddled with a couple of wires, tried the ignition, nothing. The battery seemed dead, but that didn't explain the missing distributor cap. "Looks like you might need a tow," I said. "You got a phone? Could call a tow truck from the next town over." He shook his head. "No service out here. Been trying for hours." That should have been my first clue to leave. But something about the way he said it, almost too calm for a man stranded in the middle of nowhere, didn't sit right with me. I glanced at his car. No luggage visible, no food wrappers. Nothing to suggest he'd been stuck here for hours. just a clean interior and what looked like a duffel bag in the back seat. "Well, I could give you a lift to the nearest town," I offered. "Ain't much, but there's a gas station with a payphone about 20 miles from here." He nodded, but something in his eyes darkened. "I'd appreciate that," he repeated, this time slower, more deliberate. "Let me grab something from my truck first," I said, needing a moment to think. Something felt wrong here, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As I walked back to my rig, I noticed Martin watching me with an intensity that raised the hair on the back of my neck. In the cab, I quickly checked my phone. Still no service. I opened the glove compartment and took out the revolver I kept there. It wasn't strictly legal to carry across state lines, but out here, law enforcement was theoretical at best. I checked that it was loaded, then tucked it under the driver's seat where I could reach it easily if needed. I led him to the truck, feeling a little on edge now, but telling myself I was overreacting. He climbed into the passenger seat, and I got back behind the wheel. As I turned the key and the engine roared to life, a small voice in the back of my mind told me I'd made a mistake. But what was I supposed to do? Leave him out there? For a while we drove in silence. The road stretched out like a black ribbon, no signs of life in any direction. Martin didn't say a word, just stared out the window, watching the desert roll by. I tried to make small talk, but he wasn't much of a conversationalist. Kept his answers short, almost mechanical. "So, what kind of work you do in Salt Lake?" I asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between us for nearly 10 minutes. "Construction," he said without looking at me. "Demolition, mostly." I nodded, glancing at his hands. They didn't look like a construction worker's hands, too clean, despite the grease from the car engine. "Good money in that?" "Enough." After about 15 minutes, the silence started to feel suffocating. I glanced over at him, and that's when I noticed his hands. They were covered in old scars, deep cuts that had healed unevenly, the kind you don't get from fixing cars. So I started trying to sound casual. "Where you headed?" "Nowhere special," he replied, still staring out the window. "Just passing through." There was something about the way he said it that made my skin crawl. I decided to leave it at that, focusing on the road ahead. But my mind was racing. Why was he out here? What was he doing with that car? The road ahead curved around a rocky outcropping, and as we rounded the bend, something caught my eye, a flash of metal in the distance. As we drew closer, I could make out another vehicle parked on the shoulder about a half-mile ahead. "Looks like someone else is having car trouble," I said, nodding toward the vehicle. Martin turned his attention to the road, his posture suddenly tense. "We should keep going," he said, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. "Could be someone needs help," I replied, already slowing the truck. "Like you did." "Trust me," Martin said, turning to look at me directly now. "We don't want to stop there." I met his gaze, and what I saw sent ice through my veins. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of a predator sizing up prey. Suddenly he turned toward me, his face calm, but his eyes wrong. There was no emotion there, just a cold emptiness that sent a jolt of fear down my spine. "You ever think about what happens to people who disappear out here?" he asked. The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't expected it, and I didn't know how to respond. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know," he continued, his tone casual, almost like he was talking about the weather. "People go missing all the time on these back roads. No one ever finds them, not alive anyway." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. The desert outside suddenly felt more hostile, the endless expanse of nothingness a little more menacing. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, unable to hide the unease in my voice. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, something metallic that glinted in the sunlight. A knife. A big, ugly hunting knife with a blade that looked like it had seen more than just deer. Panic surged through me, but I kept my hands on the wheel, trying to stay calm. My mind raced, searching for a way out. I wasn't armed. The gun was under my seat. Impossibly far away now, and the nearest town was still miles away. Running wasn't an option, not at 60 miles per hour. "You don't need to do this," I said, trying to reason with him. "I'm just a trucker, man. I got nothing you want. He smiled then, a slow, eerie smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not about what I want," he said. "It's about what I need." Before I could react, he lunged at me, the knife flashing through the air. Instinct kicked in, and I swerved the truck hard to the right, sending the cab into a violent skid. The momentum threw him off balance, and he slammed into the door with a grunt. I took the opportunity to slam on the brakes, the truck screeching to a stop on the side of the road. Without thinking, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a tire iron I kept under the seat, and swung it at him with all my strength. The impact caught him in the chest, knocking the wind out of him. He dropped the knife, and I scrambled to open the door, practically throwing myself out of the truck. I stumbled onto the hot asphalt, gasping for breath. My heart was pounding in my ears, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear him coughing inside the cab, struggling to get up. I wasn't sticking around to find out if he succeeded. In my panic, I'd forgotten about the gun under the seat. All I could think about was putting distance between myself and the man with the knife. The terrain around us was mostly flat, with nowhere to hide except for a small rise about a quarter-mile away, where I could see what looked like an old trailer. Without looking back, I sprinted toward the nearest rise in the land, where I'd seen an old rusted pickup parked near a rundown trailer. The sun beat down mercilessly as I ran, each breath burning in my lungs. I could hear movement behind me, Martin recovering, possibly pursuing. The trailer grew closer, details becoming clearer. It was an old airstream, its silver surface dulled by years of desert dust and sun. The pickup next to it was from the 70s at least, faded red paint peeling from its hood. "Help!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "Anybody there?" As luck would have it, the place wasn't abandoned. An older guy came out, his face a mixture of surprise and confusion as I barreled toward him. He was rail-thin, with a deeply lined face and eyes squinting against the harsh sun. A cigarette dangled from his lips, and he wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt despite the heat. "Help!" I shouted again, barely able to catch my breath. "There's a guy back there. He tried to kill me." The old man blinked, but didn't hesitate. He reached into the cab of his truck and pulled out a shotgun. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice calm but firm. I glanced back toward my truck, now a good distance away. I could see Martin climbing out of the cab, something in his hand catching the sunlight, the knife. "He's armed," I warned, ducking behind the old man's pickup. The old man, who later told me his name was Earl, chambered a round in the shotgun, the sound cutting through the desert air like a thunderclap. "You there," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "Stop right where you are." Martin froze, then slowly raised his hands, the knife still clutched in one of them. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Martin's gaze shifted from Earl to me, and I saw a promise in those cold eyes, a promise that this wasn't over. "Drop the knife," Earl commanded, taking aim with the shotgun. Martin hesitated, then let the knife fall to the ground. But something about his posture, tense, ready to spring, told me he wasn't giving up. "What's your plan here?" Earl asked me quietly, keeping his eyes on Martin. "Got a phone we can use to call the sheriff?" I shook my head. "No service, and my truck keys are still in the ignition." Earl nodded slowly. "Well, we can't just stand here in a Mexican standoff all day. I've got a satellite phone inside. You make the call. I'll keep our friend here company." I hesitated, not wanting to leave Earl alone with Martin, but we needed help. "Be careful," I warned. "He's not right." Earl chuckled grimly. "Son, I was guarding prisoners in Vietnam before you were born. I can handle one skinny psycho for 5 minutes." I backed toward the trailer, keeping my eyes on Martin until I reached the door. Inside, the airstream was surprisingly neat, with maps and books stacked carefully on a small table. I found the satellite phone and dialed 911, quickly explaining the situation to the dispatcher. "Sheriff's about 40 minutes out," the dispatcher told me. "Can you hold tight till then?" "We'll try," I said, not sure if that was a promise I could keep. When I emerged from the trailer, the scene had changed. Earl and Martin were closer to each other now, perhaps 20 feet apart. Earl's shotgun was still trained on Martin, but Martin had shifted position, angling himself toward my truck. "They're coming," I called to Earl. "Sheriff's on the way." Martin's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. In that moment, I knew what he was thinking. If he could get to my truck before the sheriff arrived, he could escape. "Don't even think about it," Earl warned, as if reading Martin's thoughts. "I may be old, but I can still shoot straight enough to take your legs off." Martin smiled, that same cold, empty smile. "You'd shoot an unarmed man? That what they taught you in the Army?" Earl didn't flinch. "Marines, and yes, if that unarmed man is a threat, I'd shoot him without losing any sleep." We approached my truck cautiously, the old man leading the way with his shotgun raised. But when we reached the cab, Martin hadn't moved. He stood exactly where we'd left him, still smiling, that unnerving smile. "Get in your truck," Earl told me quietly. "Get those keys and bring them back here. Don't turn your back on him." I nodded, edging toward the driver's side door, my eyes locked on Martin. The cab door was still open from my hasty exit. I reached in, grabbed the keys from the ignition, and remembered the gun under the seat. In one quick motion, I snatched it up and backed away from the truck. "Got a revolver," I told Earl, feeling slightly more secure with the weight of the gun in my hand. Earl nodded approvingly. "Good, now we wait." The minutes stretched endlessly. The sun beat down and sweat trickled down my back. Martin remained standing, barely moving except to occasionally shift his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes never left us, calculating, patient. When the sheriff's vehicles finally appeared on the horizon, the relief was so intense I nearly collapsed. 2 patrol cars approached, dust clouds billowing behind them. As the deputies emerged from their vehicles, guns drawn, Martin finally spoke again. "This isn't over," he said softly, his voice carrying on the still desert air. "I'll find you, Lyle Brennan." A chill ran through me at the sound of my name on his lips. I hadn't told him my last name. The deputies ordered Martin to lie face down on the ground, which he did with an eerie compliance that was somehow more disturbing than resistance would have been. As they cuffed him, one of the deputies recognized him right away. "Holy shit," the deputy muttered. "That's Raymond Mercer. Been on our most wanted list for months." Raymond Mercer. Not Martin Grice. A drifter wanted for a string of disappearances across the state. He'd been luring truckers and stranded motorists to their deaths for years, always slipping through the cracks somehow. I watched as they loaded him into the back of the squad car, the sun beating down on us as if nothing unusual had happened. Raymond, or whatever his real name was, kept his eyes on me the entire time, that small smile never leaving his face. The deputies nodded at me as they drove off, leaving the quiet desert behind. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and climbed back into my truck. The tire iron lay on the floor, smeared with blood. I didn't dwell on it. I had a job to do. "You're going to want to come down to the station," Sheriff Hollister told me, his weathered face grave as he leaned against his patrol car. "There's some things you need to see." Earl had insisted I stay at his trailer until the sheriff arrived. After the deputies had taken Raymond away, Earl had made us coffee strong enough to dissolve spoons and listen to my story without interruption. "You're lucky to be alive," he'd said simply when I finished. "I've heard stories about drivers disappearing on these roads. Never thought much of it until now." The sheriff's station in Wells, Nevada was a small, squat building that looked like it had been built in the 50s and hadn't seen much renovation since. Inside, the air conditioning struggled against the desert heat, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. Sheriff Hollister led me to a small conference room where crime scene photos were spread across a table. I hesitated at the doorway, suddenly unsure if I wanted to see whatever was on that table. "Mr. Brennan," Hollister said gently, "I know this is difficult, but we need your help. Raymond Mercer has been operating in this area for at least 3 years, maybe longer. We've found 7 bodies so far, all truck drivers or motorists who disappeared along these back roads. We think there are more." I swallowed hard and entered the room. The photos showed remote locations, shallow graves in the desert, ravines where bodies had been discarded, a mine shaft where remains had been discovered, each site marked with small yellow evidence markers. "Jesus," I muttered, looking away from a particularly graphic image. "Mercer's never talked," Hollister continued, his voice clinical now, detached. "Never confirmed any killings, never led us to any bodies. But we know it's him. And now, thanks to you, we've got him with a weapon attempting murder. That's enough to put him away for good. I nodded, still trying to process everything. He knew my name, I said finally. My full name. I never told him my last name. Hollister exchanged a glance with his deputy. He does his research. We found notebooks in his car with details about his victims, routes they drove, schedules, personal information. He plans meticulously. A cold weight settled in my stomach, so I wasn't random. He targeted me specifically. Looks that way, Hollister confirmed. Your company, Summit Logistics, right? 3 other Summit drivers have disappeared over the past 2 years, all taking this same shortcut route. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Someone at Summit might be involved, sharing driver information, schedules, routes, or Mercer had been watching, learning patterns, selecting his victims carefully. I need to see his notebooks, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Hollister hesitated, then nodded to his deputy, who left the room and returned moments later with an evidence bag containing several worn notebooks. Hollister pulled on latex gloves before removing one and opening it on the table. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting, names, dates, vehicle descriptions, company logos, route information. And then I saw my name, circled in red, Lyle Brennan, Summit, Elko to SLC, solo driver, takes back roads. Below that, more disturbing details. 6'1", approx 220 pounds, ex-military, likely armed, caution. He's been watching me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For how long? Based on the entries, at least 6 months, Hollister replied. You weren't his first choice from Summit. You were next in line. Next in line. The words echoed in my head, conjuring images of the others who hadn't been as lucky as me. Drivers I might have known, might have passed on the road with a friendly wave, never knowing they were marked for death. There's more, Hollister said, turning a page to reveal a crude map. We think these markings indicate where he's buried his victims. Some we've found, others. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. There were more bodies out there, waiting to be discovered in the vast Nevada desert. We'll need you to sign a formal statement, Hollister continued, closing the notebook. And you'll likely be called to testify when this goes to trial. I nodded mechanically, still trying to absorb everything I'd learned. What about my delivery? My truck? One of my deputies can follow you to the state line, Hollister offered. As for the delivery, that's between you and your company. But Mr. Brennan, he fixed me with a serious look, I'd be very careful about who at Summit you talk to about this. Until we know if Mercer was working alone, you should assume your information isn't secure. The implication sent another chill through me. If someone at Summit was feeding information to Mercer, they might not take kindly to being exposed. After giving my statement, I returned to my truck with Deputy Alvarez following in his patrol car. The sun was starting to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, if you didn't know what secrets the landscape held. I called my dispatcher from the sheriff's station, explaining I'd be delayed due to an incident on the road. I kept the details vague, unsure who I could trust. Marge sounded annoyed, but told me to get the delivery to Salt Lake as soon as possible. Everything okay over there? Deputy Alvarez asked as I climbed into my cab. Yeah, I lied, starting the engine. Just need to make up some time. As I pulled back onto the road, the deputy following at a respectful distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The open road had always represented freedom to me, opportunity. Now it felt exposed, vulnerable. I checked my mirrors compulsively, scrutinizing every vehicle that appeared behind me. The deputy's presence was reassuring, but he would only follow me to the state line. After that, I'd be on my own again. Night fell quickly in the desert, the darkness absolute except for my headlights cutting through the gloom and the distant stars overhead. I kept the CB radio on, listening to the chatter between other drivers, wondering if any of them had ever encountered Mercer, if any of them might be his next target. At the Utah state line, Deputy Alvarez flashed his lights in farewell and turned back toward Nevada. I was alone now, the dark road stretching ahead toward Salt Lake City. I reached under the seat, ensuring the revolver was still there, then focused on the road ahead. My mind raced with questions. How had Mercer known my route? Who at Summit might be involved? And most troubling of all, what if Mercer wasn't the only predator out there, hunting drivers on these lonely roads? The radio crackled with static, then a voice broke through. Breaker 19, this is Sidewinder, looking for Nighthawk. You got your ears on? Over. I frowned. Nighthawk wasn't my handle, and I didn't recognize Sidewinder either. Probably just drivers I hadn't encountered before. Sidewinder, this is Big Sky. Nighthawk isn't on this channel. Over, another voice responded. Roger that, Big Sky. Just checking if our friend made his delivery today. Been radio silent since Elko. Over. Something about the exchange raised the hair on the back of my neck. Was it innocent chatter between drivers, or something more sinister? I kept silent, listening as the conversation continued. Haven't heard from him, Big Sky replied, but I passed a Summit truck about 20 miles back, heading toward Salt Lake. Wasn't Nighthawk, though. Different driver. Over. Copy that. Keep your eyes open. Sidewinder out. The exchange left me unsettled. I turned the radio volume down, suddenly paranoid about who might be listening, who might be tracking my movements. The remaining drive to Salt Lake City was the longest of my life, every mile marked by growing dread and constant vigilance. By the time I reached the outskirts of Salt Lake, dawn was breaking over the mountains. I should have felt relief, but instead, exhaustion and paranoia had formed a toxic mixture that left me jumping at shadows. As I approached the delivery depot, my phone rang. The display showed Summit Logistics. I hesitated, then answered. Brennan, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Lyle, it's Marge, just checking your ETA. Everything okay? You sound tired. Yeah, just been a long haul, I replied carefully. About 10 minutes out from the depot. Good. Listen, after you drop off, head straight to Peterson's truck repair on Industrial Parkway. I've already called them about your brake issue. They're expecting you. Thanks, Marge, I said, ending the call. As I pulled into the delivery depot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The routine process of checking in, unloading, and signing paperwork felt surreal, like I was going through the motions in a dream. Every face I encountered, the security guard at the gate, the forklift operator, the receiving manager, seemed to hide secrets behind polite smiles. Any one of them could be connected to Mercer, could be reporting my movements back to whoever was pulling the strings. Once the delivery was complete, I sat in my cab for a long moment, staring at the address Marge had given me for the repair shop. Protocol said I should go directly there, get the brakes fixed before heading back to Elko. But something didn't feel right. I made a decision. Instead of heading to Peterson's, I drove to the nearest police station. 6 months later, I was back on I-80, heading west toward Reno with a load of electronics. The trial against Raymond Mercer, his real name as it turned out, was still pending, but the investigation had revealed more than anyone had expected. Mercer wasn't working alone. He had a partner inside Summit Logistics, Travis Weldon, a fleet manager who had access to all driver schedules and routes. Weldon had been feeding information to Mercer for years, targeting drivers who took the back roads, who drove alone, who wouldn't be missed immediately if they disappeared. The FBI had found 12 bodies based on the maps in Mercer's notebooks, all truck drivers, all killed the same way, stabbed repeatedly, then buried in remote locations throughout Nevada, Utah, and Idaho. The earliest victim dated back almost 5 years. I'd quit Summit the day after I spoke to the Salt Lake City police. Couldn't stomach the thought of working for a company where someone had marked me for death. Found a new gig with a smaller outfit based in Reno, hauling less freight but making better money. The nightmares hadn't stopped completely, but they were less frequent now. Sometimes I still woke up in a cold sweat, feeling the weight of Mercer's knife in my dreams, hearing his voice. This isn't over. I'll find you, Lyle Brennan. But Mercer was in a maximum security facility awaiting trial, and Weldon had taken a plea deal, giving up everything he knew in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The system had worked, more or less. I still carried the revolver under my seat, still checked my mirrors more often than necessary, still avoided back roads when I could help it. The open highway didn't feel the same anymore. The freedom tinged with vulnerability, the solitude with isolation. The sun was setting as I approached the Nevada state line, painting the sky in shades of red and purple. My new rig hummed beneath me, everything in perfect working order. No brake issues, no mechanical problems to worry about. My phone buzzed with a text from my new dispatcher, Aaron. "Check in when you cross state line, weather warning ahead." I thumbed a quick response, then set the phone aside. The sky ahead was darkening with storm clouds, unusual for this time of year. I'd have to be careful, take it slow through the mountain passes if the rain got heavy. As I crossed into Nevada, the first fat raindrops began to hit my windshield. I turned the wipers on, adjusting my speed for the worsening conditions. The traffic was light, most sensible drivers already pulled over at rest stops or motels to wait out the storm. About 20 miles in, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror, closing fast despite the rain. Some idiot in a hurry, probably. I kept to my lane, maintaining a steady speed as the vehicle, a dark SUV, drew closer. Instead of passing, it matched my speed, hanging just behind my trailer in the driving rain. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Probably nothing, I told myself. Just another driver using my taillights as a guide through the storm. But the SUV stayed with me, mile after mile, never passing, never falling back. Just maintaining that same unsettling distance, close enough to see me, not close enough for me to make out anything about the driver. I reached for the CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is eastbound Summit. Anybody got eyes on this SUV riding my tail through the storm? Over." Static answered me, then a gruff voice broke through. "Summit, this is westbound night train passing mile marker 47. I see you both. Want me to drop back and get his plates? Over." "Appreciate it, night train. Something doesn't feel right. Over." I watched in my mirror as a semi appeared heading westbound, its headlights briefly illuminating the SUV behind me as they passed. The CB crackled again. "Summit, this is night train. Couldn't get a clear read on the plates, too much rain. But it's a black Ford Explorer, Nevada tags, looks like 2 occupants. They're hanging back like they're watching you. Want me to call it in? Over." My mouth went dry. "Affirmative, night train. Call it in. I'm approaching exit 43, going to pull off. Over." "Copy that, Summit. Be careful out there. Night train out." I slowed gradually, signaling for the exit. The SUV maintained its distance, still following. As I took the exit ramp, it followed. My heart hammered in my chest as I pulled into a well-lit truck stop, parking where several other semis were already waiting out the storm. The SUV drove past slowly, then circled back, parking at the far end of the lot. I couldn't see the occupants through the rain-streaked windows, but I could feel their eyes on me. I reached under the seat, wrapping my hand around the grip of the revolver, and waited. The rain drummed on the roof of the cab, almost drowning out the sound of my own pulse pounding in my ears. Minutes passed. The SUV remained where it was, engine running, wipers slapping back and forth. I debated making a run for the truck stop building, but the distance felt too exposed, too vulnerable. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then checked the message. "Mr. Brennan, this is Detective Morgan with Nevada Highway Patrol. We received a call about a vehicle following you. Officers are en route to your location. Please remain in your vehicle until they arrive." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a new wave of tension as the SUV's doors opened. 2 figures emerged, wearing dark rain gear with hoods pulled up, obscuring their faces. They began walking toward my truck. I reached for the door lock, ensuring it was secured, then gripped the revolver tighter, keeping it below the window line. The figures approached slowly, deliberately, splitting up to come at my truck from both sides. The CB crackled to life. "Attention all drivers at the Bayowawi truck stop. This is Nevada Highway Patrol. We have units arriving on scene. If you are the driver of the eastbound Summit truck being followed, flash your lights twice to identify yourself." I reached for the light switch, flashing the headlights twice. Almost immediately, patrol cars with flashing lights pulled into the lot from both entrances, blocking any escape. The 2 figures froze, then turned and ran back toward their SUV. They didn't make it. The officers intercepted them, ordering them to the ground at gunpoint. I watched, hardly daring to breathe, as the officers handcuffed the suspects and led them to separate patrol cars. One of the officers approached my truck, rain dripping from his hat. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Officer Reyes. You can come out now. It's safe. I climbed down from the cab, the revolver left behind under the seat. Who are they? I asked, nodding toward the patrol cars. Reyes's expression was grim. Relatives of Raymond Mercer, his brother and cousin. We found weapons in their vehicle, along with your photo and route information. They've been tracking you since you left Reno. A cold weight settled in my stomach. How did they know my route? That's what we're trying to figure out, Reyes admitted. Mercer's network might be bigger than we thought. You're going to need to come with us to make a statement. I nodded, looking back at my truck. Another delivery delayed, another statement to make. But I was alive. We'll have an officer escort you to your destination afterward, Reyes added, seeing my concern. And the FBI wants to talk to you about protective measures going forward. Protective measures. The word sounded hollow. As long as I was on the road, I would be exposed, vulnerable. But the alternative, giving up the only life I'd known for 20 years, seemed impossible. As I followed Reyes to his patrol car, the rain finally began to let up, revealing bits of blue sky between the clouds. I thought about Earl, the old man who had helped me that day in the desert. He'd been living in that trailer for 40 years, he'd told me. Had seen all kinds of darkness out there in the middle of nowhere. But he stayed. You adapt, he'd said when I asked him why he didn't move somewhere safer, somewhere less isolated. You learn to see the danger coming, and you prepare for it. But you don't stop living your life because there are monsters out there. You just get better at fighting monsters. I climbed into the patrol car, watching as the officers secured my truck. The open road was waiting, and despite everything, I knew I'd be back on it soon. Different route, different cargo, same vigilance. The monsters were out there, always had been, but so was I, and I wasn't going anywhere. As we drove away from the truck stop, my phone buzzed with another text from my dispatcher. Weather clearing ahead, new ETA? I smiled grimly and typed back, delayed, police escort, will update soon. The highway stretched before us, wet asphalt gleaming in the emerging sunlight. Somewhere along that road, another truck driver was checking his mirrors, unaware of what might be following. Maybe someday I'd find a way to warn them all. Until then, I'd keep driving, keep watching, keep surviving. The monsters didn't own the road, not while drivers like me were still on it. There's a point in every person's life where you realize you've been a dumbass all along. For me, it hit me around the time I found myself knee-deep in mud, carrying a rifle in one hand and the body of my buddy in the other. Not exactly the scenario I'd envisioned when I signed up to be a park ranger, and definitely not something they put in the brochures. My name's Darren Slade, and I've been working as a ranger in the Cascades for about 4 years now. Not your usual I wanted to escape city life type. Nah, I'm just broke. And this job had free housing and a paycheck that didn't suck. Never had any complaints, though. I liked the quiet, and the occasional tourist or hiker was usually more interested in taking selfies with trees than causing trouble. The Cascades might look like paradise in those glossy tourism magazines, but it's a different story when you're the one responsible for 50,000 acres of wilderness. Most days consist of trail maintenance, checking permits, and occasionally rescuing some unprepared hiker who thought a bottle of Dasani and their iPhone was all they needed for an 8-hour trek. I live in a small cabin near the eastern entrance of the park. Nothing fancy, just a bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, and what I generously call a living room. The walls are thin enough that I can hear every drop of rain hammering against the roof during storms, and the heater makes a sound like a dying car engine when it kicks on in winter. But it's mine. Or at least it is for as long as I wear the uniform. My boss, Frank Morrison, runs a tight operation. He's been managing the park for nearly 20 years and knows every trail, creek, and problem spot like the back of his hand. He's fair, but doesn't tolerate laziness or stupidity, which works for me. Most of the other rangers are decent folks. We're not exactly a tight-knit family, but we look out for each other. That's just the way it has to be when you're dealing with wilderness this vast and unforgiving. Before all this happened, I'd dealt with my share of incidents, lost hikers, illegal campers, Even a bear attack once that left a tourist with some nasty scars and a story he'll be telling until the day he dies. But nothing prepared me for what happened in September 2011. It started with reports from hikers about trashed campsites in the northwest region of the park. Initially, we thought it was just irresponsible campers not cleaning up after themselves. Maybe some teenagers thinking they were funny. It's amazing how destructive people can be when they think no one's watching. Then the reports got weirder. People mentioned hearing strange noises at night. Not your typical forest sounds like owls or coyotes, but something that one hiker described as halfway between a scream and static. Another couple claimed they'd packed up and left their site at 2 a.m. after feeling like they were being watched for hours. I remember sitting in the morning briefing, sipping coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through an old sock, listening to Frank recount these stories with his usual skepticism. "Probably just a cougar," he said, rubbing his graying beard. "People from the city hear one animal sound they can't identify, and suddenly they're convinced it's Bigfoot." Everyone laughed, including me. "But," Frank continued, his expression turning serious, "we've got 3 more reports of damaged campsites, and one group said their food was gone, cooler and all, so we need to check it out." My supervisor, Ed Hansen, a good guy who likes to talk about his fishing trips way more than I care to hear, looked over at me. "Darren, why don't you take this one? Take the northwest quadrant tomorrow, see what's going on." I nodded, not thinking much of it. After the meeting, Ed pulled me aside. "Take someone with you," he said, his usual jovial expression replaced with something more concerned. "And bring a rifle. Now, I don't always carry a firearm on patrol. Most days, it's unnecessary weight." But there was something in Ed's tone that made me pause. "You think it's that serious?" I asked. Ed sighed, glancing around like he was about to share a secret. Frank didn't want to alarm everyone, but one of the hikers found blood at their campsite. A lot of it. No sign of anyone injured, though. "Could be an animal," I suggested. "Someone shoots a deer illegally, tries to butcher it at camp?" "Maybe," Ed replied, not sounding convinced. "Just be careful out there, okay? Take Pete with you." Pete Jacobs had transferred to our station about a year earlier. The quiet type, didn't talk much about his life before joining the Park Service. He had this way of saying everything with his face, though, which usually meant I had to guess if he was amused or disgusted, sometimes both. But he was reliable, knew how to handle himself in the woods, and didn't waste time with bullshit small talk on long patrols. That night, I went back to my cabin and pulled out the topographic maps of the northwest section. It wasn't particularly remote, about 6 miles from the nearest road, but the terrain was rough, dense forest, steep ridges, and a few narrow ravines that created natural bottlenecks. Bear country for sure, maybe even mountain lion territory. As I traced possible routes with my finger, I couldn't shake a strange feeling of unease. I've spent enough time in the wilderness to trust my instincts, and something about this assignment felt off. I told myself it was nothing, probably just some aggressive black bear or a cougar that had wandered too close to human territory. I'd dealt with those before. I checked my rifle, a Remington 700 that had been my constant companion on backcountry patrols. Cleaned it, loaded it, and set it by the door. Just in case. That night I dreamt of walking through endless trees, following a trail of blood that grew wider with each step. In the dream, I could hear something moving just out of sight, keeping pace with me, watching. I woke at 4 a.m., drenched in sweat despite the cool September air coming through my cracked window. As I made coffee, I watched the sun creep over the mountains, painting the trees gold. It should have been beautiful, calming. Instead, all I could think about was that dream and what might be waiting for me in the northwest quadrant. I didn't know it then, but that sunrise would be the last normal moment I'd experience for a long time. The last moment before everything I thought I knew about these woods, about nature itself, would be turned upside down. Because what was waiting out there wasn't a bear or a cougar or anything I'd been trained to handle. It was something else entirely. I met Pete at the ranger station just after sunrise. The morning air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and a light fog hung between the trees, giving the forest an ethereal quality that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Pete nodded at me, his usual greeting. He was dressed in standard ranger gear, olive green uniform, sturdy boots, hat pulled low over his eyes. I noticed the rifle slung over his shoulder and the extra ammunition pouches on his belt. So Ed had briefed him too. "Mornin'," I said, checking my pack one last time. "Ready for a wild goose chase?" Pete's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Geese don't trash campsites." We loaded our gear into one of the park's battered jeeps and headed for the trailhead nearest to the reported incidents. The drive was quiet, with Pete staring out the window and me focusing on navigating the rutted service road. The radio buzzed occasionally with routine park communications, a reminder about a trail closure due to erosion, a question about a permit application. Normal stuff. It all felt so normal. The northwest region of Cascade Park isn't on most tourist maps. It's beautiful in that raw, untamed way that can make you feel small and insignificant. Dense stands of Douglas fir and western hemlock create a perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. The undergrowth is thick salal, Oregon grape, and sword ferns fighting for every inch of space. In some places, the moss grows so thick on the ground that it feels like walking on a sponge. We parked at the end of the service road and continued on foot, following a maintenance trail that would eventually lead us to the first reported incident site. About a mile in, Pete broke the silence. "What do you think we'll find?" he asked, his voice low as if he didn't want the forest to hear. I shrugged, adjusting my pack. "Probably just a hungry bear with bad manners. Maybe someone's illegally dumping garbage and attracting wildlife." Pete nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. The first hour of hiking was uneventful. We checked a few regular campsites along the way, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Just as I was starting to think this might be a wasted trip, Pete stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "You smell that?" he asked. I paused, taking a deep breath. There was something, a heavy, sickly sweet odor underneath the usual forest scents of pine and soil. It reminded me of roadkill left too long in the summer sun, but different, worse somehow. "Yeah," I nodded, my hand unconsciously moving to rest on my rifle. "Let's check it out." We veered off the main trail, following a smaller path that looked like it had seen recent use. The smell grew stronger, making my eyes water. After about a quarter mile, we found the first campsite. I've seen bear damage before. They're messy, destructive, and single-minded when food is involved. They'll rip open tents, scatter supplies, break containers, anything to get to what they're after. But this was something else entirely. When we got to the first campsite, I noticed the tents were shredded, like not the normal claw marks I'd expect from a bear. This was something else. It was almost like someone or something had torn into the fabric with precision, like it was pissed off at nylon. The destruction was methodical. The tent hadn't just been clawed open, it had been systematically dismantled, the fabric torn in long, straight lines. The sleeping bags inside had been pulled apart seam by seam. A cooler lay on its side, its contents scattered, but not in the haphazard way of an animal looking for food. It was more like someone had examined each item and then deliberately discarded it. "What the hell?" I muttered, crouching to examine the remains of a backpack. The straps had been severed cleanly, almost surgically. "This doesn't look like animal damage." Pete wrinkled his nose at the stench. "Maybe someone did this? Vandals?" I shook my head. "Out here, 6 miles from the nearest road? That's a long way to hike just to trash someone's camp." The area smelled rank, too. Pete muttered something about rotting meat. He wasn't wrong. The scent was heavy, like old roadkill, but worse. And there was something else about it. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Let's look around," I said, standing and scanning the perimeter of the campsite. "See if we can find any tracks." We spent the next 30 minutes searching the area, looking for footprints, claw marks, scat, anything that might identify our culprit. That's when I noticed something odd. There weren't any animal tracks. Normally, you'd see some paw prints, scat, something. This time, nothing. It was like whatever did this wasn't even touching the ground. That should have been my first clue to turn back. But I'm an idiot, remember? We should follow the trail, I said, pointing to what looked like a drag mark leading away from the campsite. See where it goes? Pete hesitated, his face unreadable. You sure that's a good idea? I wasn't, not really, but I had a job to do. Probably not, but we need to figure out what's going on here. What if there are hikers in trouble? He nodded reluctantly, and we set off, following the trail deeper into the forest. The path took us away from the established trails into denser, older growth. The trees here were massive, creating a cathedral-like space beneath their branches. In normal circumstances, it would have been peaceful, even awe-inspiring. Now, with that smell lingering in the air and the silence pressing in around us, it felt oppressive. I noticed something else too. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just our footsteps and the occasional creak of ancient trees swaying in the high breeze. After about an hour of hiking, we found the second campsite. It looked worse than the first. Blood on the ground this time, a lot of it. The tents were torn to shreds and personal belongings, backpacks, clothes, even a few shoes, were scattered around like confetti. But no bodies. Pete's face turned pale, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. Where the hell were the campers? We need to radio this in, Pete said, unslinging his pack and reaching for his radio. I nodded, scanning the trees surrounding us. That feeling of being watched was stronger now, almost palpable. The blood on the ground was dark, tacky, at least a day old, maybe more. There was a lot of it, too much for someone to lose and walk away. Pete tried the radio, but all we got was static. Signal's too weak, he muttered, frustration evident in his voice. We're in a dead zone. Let's move to higher ground, I suggested, pointing to a ridge about a half-mile away. Might get better reception there. As we gathered our gear to move on, I noticed something glinting near the edge of the campsite. Curious, I walked over and crouched down. It was a camera, one of those expensive digital SLRs that serious photographers use. It was partially hidden under a torn backpack, as if someone had tried to conceal it. The lens was cracked, and there were dark smudges on the body that I didn't want to think too hard about. Pete, I called, holding up the camera. Look at this. He came over, eyeing the device warily. Think it still works? I pressed the power button, surprised when the screen lit up. The battery indicator showed nearly full. Let's see what's on it, I said, navigating to the gallery. The most recent photos were landscapes, stunning shots of the mountains at sunset, a close-up of dew on a spider's web, a time-lapse of stars wheeling overhead. Typical photographer stuff. But then the images changed. The last dozen photos were taken in rapid succession, the timestamps just seconds apart. They started normal enough. A shot of the campsite at dusk, the photographer's companion smiling next to a newly built fire. But then they became erratic, blurry, as if taken in panic. The final image made my blood run cold. It showed a figure at the edge of the campsite, partially obscured by trees. Tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. The image was blurry, the lighting poor, but there was no mistaking the wrongness of the figure's proportions. What the hell is that? Pete whispered, leaning in to get a better look. I shook my head, unable to find words. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person either, not any person I'd ever seen. Just then, a twig snapped in the forest behind us. We both whirled around, rifles coming up instinctively. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just been there, watching us, and maybe it still was. We need to get to higher ground, I said again, my voice steadier than I felt. Now. Pete nodded, his eyes still scanning the tree line. Yeah, let's move. We set off toward the ridge, moving faster now, the weight of our packs and the rough terrain forgotten in our urgency. The camera was tucked safely in my pocket, its final image burned into my memory. Whatever had happened here, whatever had torn apart these campsites and left blood on the ground, it wasn't a bear or a cougar or any animal I knew. And I had a sinking feeling that we were about to find out exactly what it was. The climb to the ridge was steeper than it looked, the ground slick with decaying leaves and moss. Every few minutes, one of us would stop and scan the forest behind us. that prickling sense of being watched never fading. Twice I thought I saw movement in the trees, just a flash of something pale, there and gone too quickly to identify. "You see that?" I asked Pete after the second time. He nodded grimly. "Something's following us." When we finally reached the top of the ridge, Pete immediately tried the radio again. This time the static gave way to a crackling voice. "Ed, back at the station." The signal was weak, though. Classic Park Service radio. They work just fine when you're in the station, but crap out the moment you need them. "Repeat, this is base. Darren, Pete, do you copy?" Ed's voice came through in broken fragments. "Ed, this is Darren. We've got a situation out here," I said, speaking clearly and slowly. "2 campsites destroyed. Signs of violence, possible injuries or fatalities. No bodies found yet." "Break up. Say again. Sending backup." The transmission faded into static. Ed's voice crackled through, but we couldn't make out much. Something about sending more help, but it was choppy. Pete looked at me and shrugged. "That's helpful," he grumbled, his voice low. I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Yep, Ed's probably sending us a search party right now. They'll show up when we're both dead." We checked our map, trying to decide on the best course of action. Standard procedure would be to head back to the trailhead and wait for backup. But there could be injured hikers out there, people who needed our help. And that drag trail we'd been following, it had to lead somewhere. "What do you think?" I asked Pete, knowing what my own instincts were telling me. He stared at the map for a long moment, then out at the vast expanse of forest spreading below us. "We should follow the trail," he said finally. "At least until we find out what happened to those campers." I nodded, relief mingling with dread in my chest. Relief because it was the right call. Dread because every step deeper into these woods felt like walking into a trap. We made our way back down from the ridge, rejoining the trail we'd been following. The drag marks were clearer now, the ground disturbed in a way that suggested something heavy had been pulled along it. The smell was stronger too, that sick, sweet stench of decay that seemed to cling to the inside of my nostrils. The deeper we went, the worse the smell got. The forest around us had changed too. The trees here were older, massive trunks reaching up toward a canopy so thick it left the forest floor in permanent twilight. Moss draped from branches like funeral shrouds, and the undergrowth had thinned, as if nothing could grow in this perpetual gloom. That's when we heard it. A soft rustling like someone shifting in the underbrush. Pete froze, his hand hovering near his rifle. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Before Pete could answer, a figure darted across the path, fast as hell, too fast. I caught just a glimpse, something hunched over, almost humanoid but twisted, deformed. Pete didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, but whatever it was had already disappeared into the trees. Now I've seen some weird animals in my time, but this thing wasn't right. It moved like a person, but in that jerky, unnatural way that makes your skin crawl. Pete looked at me, his eyes wide. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear. "We should head back," Pete said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to agree. Every part of me screamed to get the hell out of there, but my dumbass sense of duty kicked in. We were rangers. We were supposed to protect these woods, the people who visited them, and we still hadn't found the missing campers. Against my better judgment, I nodded toward the trail. "We've come this far." We moved slower after that, more cautious. My rifle felt heavier in my hands, and I could feel the sweat running down my back, mixing with the cold September air. Every sound, the wind, the rustling of leaves, felt like it was hiding something more sinister. The trail led us to a small clearing. At first, I didn't comprehend what I was seeing. The ground was dark with dried blood, and scattered around were pieces. It took my brain a moment to process what my eyes were registering, and then we found it. There, in the clearing, were the bodies, or what was left of them. At first I couldn't tell if they were human. The limbs had been torn apart, scattered like a twisted jigsaw puzzle. Blood stained the grass, dark and slick. Pete gagged, covering his mouth. I just stood there, frozen. "Jesus Christ," I finally muttered, my voice shaking. "What the hell did this—" Pete didn't answer. His eyes were locked on something just beyond the clearing. I followed his gaze and saw it, the creature. It stood there, maybe 30 feet away, half hidden by the trees. Its body was tall and gaunt, but not in a way that made sense. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that didn't seem to fit together right. Its arms were too long, its legs bent in strange angles. And its face? Well, that's the part that'll stick with me forever. It didn't have one. Or if it did, it was more of a twisted approximation of a human face, like someone had tried to mold it out of clay but gave up halfway through. Where eyes should have been, there were just dark sunken pits. Its mouth was a jagged tear across the lower portion of its face, lined with what looked like too many teeth, all sharp and uneven. The thing stared at us, or at least I think it did. And then it moved, fast, too fast for something that size. Pete fired, the sound of the shot echoing through the trees. I didn't wait to see if he hit it. I grabbed Pete by the arm and yanked him toward the trail. "Run!" I shouted, my voice cracking. We bolted through the trees, the thing chasing after us. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, moving in that unnatural way that made my stomach twist. Pete was ahead of me, his legs pumping like his life depended on it, because it did. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was gaining on us, moving with a jerky, spider-like gait that defied natural movement. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, propelling it forward with terrifying speed. "Keep going," I yelled to Pete, fumbling with my rifle as I ran. I managed to swing around and fire off a shot, the recoil nearly causing me to lose my footing on the uneven ground. I couldn't tell if I hit it, but the thing let out a sound, a high, keening wail that was like nothing I'd ever heard before. Part animal, part something else entirely. The sound drove us forward with renewed panic. We crashed through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The trail was barely visible now, but we followed it blindly, desperate to put distance between us and that thing. The trees began to thin, and I realized we were nearing the edge of the old-growth section. If we could just reach the more traveled areas of the park, maybe we'd be safe. Maybe. Pete had pulled ahead of me again, his longer stride giving him an advantage. I saw him glance back, his face contorted with fear. He opened his mouth to say something, a warning maybe, when the ground gave way beneath him. One moment he was running, the next he was gone, tumbling down a steep embankment that had been hidden by the undergrowth. I skidded to a halt at the edge, watching in horror as Pete rolled down the slope, his body slamming against rocks and tree trunks before coming to rest at the bottom, motionless. "Pete!" I screamed, starting to make my way down the treacherous incline. A sound behind me froze my blood, that rustling, that unnatural movement. The creature was close, too close. I turned slowly, rifle raised, and found myself staring directly at it. It stood just yards away, its grotesque form fully visible in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. Up close, it was even more horrifying. Its skin wasn't just pale, but mottled with dark veins and strange, ridged protrusions that looked like they might be bones trying to push their way out. Its chest heaved with rapid, shallow movements, but it made no sound. Those empty eye sockets seemed to be studying me, calculating. I aimed my rifle at what I assumed was its head and squeezed the trigger. Click. The firing pin struck nothing. I was out of ammunition or the rifle had jammed. Either way, I was screwed. The thing tilted its head, almost curiously. Then it lunged. I threw myself to the side, tumbling down the embankment that had claimed Pete. The world spun around me, pain blossoming across my body as I hit every rock and root on the way down. When I finally came to a stop, the wind knocked out of me, and my vision swimming. I was certain the creature would be on me in seconds, but nothing came. After a moment, I managed to push myself up onto my elbows, looking around wildly. Pete lay about 20 feet away, still not moving. Of the creature, there was no sign. I crawled over to Pete, my body protesting with every movement. When I reached him, I saw that he was breathing, but a nasty gash on his head was bleeding profusely, and his left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. "Pete," I gasped, shaking his shoulder gently. "Pete, wake up." His eyes fluttered but didn't open. He was out cold. I looked up at the embankment we'd fallen down. It was steep, at least 30 feet of loose soil and rocks, with no easy way back up. Not that I wanted to go back that way. Not with that thing potentially waiting at the top. We were in a ravine of sorts. with a small stream trickling along its bottom. In the distance, I could make out what looked like the ravine opening up into wider terrain. I had to get Pete out of here. I couldn't carry him back up that slope, and I wasn't about to leave him. The only option was to follow the ravine and hope it led somewhere safe. With a groan, I managed to get to my feet. My rifle was gone, lost somewhere during the fall. All I had was my sidearm, a 9mm that felt woefully inadequate against whatever that creature was. I bent down and, with considerable effort, hoisted Pete over my shoulder in a fireman's carry. He was heavier than he looked, and my battered body screamed in protest, but I started moving, following the shallow stream away from the embankment. Every few steps, I would look back, dreading the sight of that pale, twisted form appearing at the top of the ravine. But the forest above remained still and silent, too silent. The unnatural quiet that had descended on the woods earlier had returned, pressing in around me like a physical weight. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my labored breathing and the occasional groan from Pete. I don't know how long I walked, carrying Pete through that ravine. Time seemed to blur, each painful step blending into the next. The stream beside me gradually widened, and the walls of the ravine began to slope more gently. Eventually, we emerged onto a flatter area, the forest opening up around us. I recognized where we were, about 2 miles from the service road where we'd parked the Jeep. If I could just make it there, get Pete into the vehicle. A sound behind me made me whirl around, nearly dropping Pete in the process. There, at the edge of the trees, stood the creature. It hadn't pursued us through the ravine, but had somehow circled around, cutting off our path to the road. It stood perfectly still, those empty eye sockets fixed on us. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to move toward us. I drew my sidearm with my free hand, knowing it would probably do little good. "Stay back," I shouted, as if reasoning with this thing was possible. It paused, tilting its head again in that unnervingly curious way. For a moment we stood frozen in a terrible tableau, me with Pete draped across my shoulders, gun aimed at a nightmare-made flesh. Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the sound of voices. Human voices calling out, "Darren! Pete, where are you guys?" The search party. Ed had come through after all. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, its whole body tensing. It made that keening noise again, softer this time, almost like a whimper. Then, with one last look at us, a look that somehow conveyed both hunger and reluctance, it turned and melted back into the forest, moving with that impossible speed. I stood there, shaking, until the voices grew closer, and flashlight beams began to cut through the trees. Only then did I lower my gun, the adrenaline that had kept me going suddenly draining away, leaving me weak and trembling. "Over here," I managed to call out, my voice hoarse. Figures emerged from the trees. Ed, 2 other rangers I recognized, and a couple of search and rescue volunteers. Their expressions changed from relief to alarm as they took in the sight of me, battered and bleeding, with an unconscious Pete over my shoulders. "Jesus, Darren, what happened?" Ed asked as they rushed forward, carefully taking Pete from me. I opened my mouth to tell them everything. The campsites, the bodies, the creature that defied explanation. But looking at their faces, at the rational concern and confusion written there, I hesitated. Who would believe me? Who would believe that something that shouldn't exist had torn apart campers and chased us through the woods? "Bear attack," I said finally, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "Big one. Caught us by surprise." Ed's eyebrows rose skeptically as the others laid Pete on a portable stretcher. "A bear did this? Where is it now?" I gestured vaguely back toward the ravine. "Lost it in there, shot at it a few times, might have wounded it." Ed studied my face for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling he knew I was lying. But he just nodded, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Let's get you two back to the station. You need medical attention, and Pete needs a hospital." As they helped me walk toward the service road, I couldn't stop myself from looking back at the forest. Through the trees, deep in the shadows, I thought I saw something pale watching us leave. But maybe that was just my imagination. Maybe. They took Pete directly to the regional hospital in an ambulance. I insisted I was fine, but Ed made me get checked out anyway. The paramedics at the ranger station cleaned and bandaged my cuts, told me I had a mild concussion, and recommended I go to the hospital for observation. I declined. I needed to be alone, needed time to process what had happened. My official report stated that we had encountered a large, aggressive black bear that had been responsible for the destruction of the campsites. I claimed the bear had charged us, causing us to flee and subsequently fall down the ravine. I didn't mention the bodies we'd found in the clearing. I didn't mention the creature with its wrong proportions and empty face. I couldn't bring myself to put that on paper, to see how crazy it would look in black and white. Frank was skeptical of my story from the start. A black bear did all that damage? And you didn't get a clear look at it? It was moving fast, I said, not meeting his eyes. Everything happened quickly. He sighed, rubbing his beard the way he did when he was frustrated. Darren, if there's something else going on here. There isn't, I interrupted, perhaps too forcefully. Just a bear, a big one. Frank didn't press further, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. He assigned a team to go back and investigate the campsites, armed with tranquilizer guns and bear spray. They found the destroyed sites just as Pete and I had described, but no sign of bodies, blood, or a drag trail. It was as if the clearing we'd found had never existed. Later, I would learn that there had been no missing persons reports filed for the area. No one had come forward looking for missing hikers or campers. It was as if those people we'd found, or what was left of them, had never existed at all. I didn't sleep for 3 days after the incident. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature, its twisted limbs and empty face. I heard that keening wail, felt the panic of running through the forest with something inhuman at my heels. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were filled with pale figures moving just beyond my vision, always watching, always waiting. I visited Pete in the hospital a week after the attack. He'd suffered a concussion, a broken arm, and various cuts and bruises, but the doctors said he'd make a full recovery. When I entered his room, he was sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the mountains in the distance. "Hey," I said, setting a bag of grapes on his bedside table. "How are you feeling?" He turned to look at me, and I was struck by how much older he seemed. There were new lines around his eyes, a tightness to his mouth that hadn't been there before. "What did you tell them?" he asked without preamble. I shifted uncomfortably. "That it was a bear." Pete let out a short, humorless laugh. "A bear, right. What was I supposed to say, Pete? That we saw something that doesn't exist? They'd have us both committed." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the window. "I'm quitting," he said finally. "As soon as I'm out of here, I'm done with the Park Service." I wasn't surprised. I'd been half expecting it. "Where will you go?" "My sister lives in Arizona. Desert. No forests, no mountains, no whatever that thing was." He looked at me again, his eyes haunted. "You should leave too, Darren. That thing, it's still out there." I couldn't argue with that. I knew he was right. But something kept me from agreeing, from saying I'd pack up and go too. Maybe it was stubbornness, or some misplaced sense of responsibility. Maybe it was the fact that I had nowhere else to go, no one waiting for me outside the park. "I'll think about it," I lied. Pete saw through it immediately. "No, you won't," he sighed. "You're going to stay, and that thing is going to be out there, watching, waiting." I didn't have a response to that. Pete quit the next day. I can't blame him. He packed his stuff and took off. Said he was done with the Park Service for good. Within a week, he was gone, headed for the Arizona desert without so much as a goodbye. Me? Well, I'm still here. Dumbass, remember? The higher-ups didn't believe us, of course. They chalked it up to a bear attack gone wrong, said we were just shaken up. But I know what I saw. And Pete knows too, even if he's halfway across the country by now. Life at the park tried to return to normal. I went back on patrol, though Frank kept me on the easier trails, closer to the ranger station. I didn't argue. The thought of going back into the deep woods, of possibly encountering that thing again, filled me with a cold dread I couldn't shake. The nightmares continued. Sometimes I'd wake up convinced the creature was in my cabin, standing at the foot of my bed with those empty eye sockets staring down at me. I started sleeping with my sidearm under my pillow, the safety off. About 3 weeks after the incident, something strange happened. I was in the station filing reports when 2 men in suits walked in. They weren't dressed for hiking or camping. Their polished shoes and pressed slacks stood out like sore thumbs among the muddy boots and rugged outdoor gear of the park rangers. They asked to speak with Frank, then with me. In the small meeting room at the back of the station, they introduced themselves as Agents Johnson and Miller from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But something about them, their stiff posture, the way they exchanged glances, the carefully neutral expressions, made me doubt that's who they really were. "We understand you had an encounter with an unidentified animal species," Agent Johnson said, his voice flat. I stuck to my story. "Black bear, aggressive one." Agent Miller's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Mr. Slade, we've read your report. We've also spoken with Mr. Jacobs." My stomach dropped. "Pete told you it was a bear, too." "In his official report, yes," Johnson nodded. "But in our conversation with him in Arizona, he was more forthcoming." I swallowed hard, saying nothing. "We'd like you to tell us exactly what you saw," Miller said, leaning forward slightly, "no matter how unusual it might sound." There was something in his tone, a hint that he already knew, that made me crack. I told them everything, the campsites, the drag trail, the bodies, and the creature with its wrong proportions and empty face. As I spoke, neither of them showed surprise or disbelief. They just nodded occasionally, taking notes. When I finished, Johnson slid a photograph across the table. "Is this what you saw?" The image was grainy, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the elongated limbs, the emaciated torso, the featureless head. I felt my blood run cold. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's classified," Miller replied smoothly, taking the photo back. "But you're not the first to encounter this phenomenon, and I doubt you'll be the last." "What is it?" I demanded. The agents exchanged another glance. "We don't know for certain," Johnson said carefully, "but we have theories. Some believe it's a previously undocumented species. Others suggest alternative origins." "What does that mean?" I pressed. Miller stood, straightening his jacket. "It means we appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Slade, and we recommend you keep this matter to yourself, for your own safety and for the safety of others who use these woods." They left shortly after, taking copies of all the reports and the memory card from the camera I'd found at the campsite. I never saw them again. Here's the kicker, though. A couple weeks after Pete left, I got a call from some government folks. Real serious types, asking a lot of questions about what we saw, where we saw it, what it looked like. They didn't say much, just nodded and took notes, and then they left. That was the last time I talked about it, until now. After they left, I tried to research similar incidents. I spent my off hours hunched over my laptop, searching for reports of strange creatures, unexplained disappearances in national parks, anything that might give me answers. Most of what I found was obvious hoaxes or easily explainable phenomena, but occasionally, buried in forum threads or obscure local news articles, I'd find something that sent a chill down my spine. Descriptions of creatures with impossible proportions, accounts of hikers feeling watched by something they couldn't see, stories of people found torn apart in ways no known animal could accomplish. There were patterns in the reports. They almost always occurred in remote areas with old-growth forests, often near water sources. The incidents tended to cluster in certain regions, including parts of the Cascades, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency. I created a map, marking every credible incident I could find. Over time, a picture emerged, not of random attacks but of territory. Whatever these things were, they had ranges, patterns. And my corner of the Cascades was right in the middle of one. I should have left then, should have followed Pete's example and gone somewhere, anywhere else. But I didn't. Maybe it was that same dumbass sense of duty that had gotten me into trouble in the first place. Maybe it was something else. A terrible fascination with what I'd seen, a need to understand what was out there in my woods. Because the thing is, every once in a while when I'm out in those woods, I get that same feeling. That prickling on the back of my neck, that sense that something's watching me, waiting. And maybe, just maybe, I'm dumb enough to stick around long enough to find out what it is. Funny thing though, when Pete quit, he told me, "Darren, I'd rather wrestle a bear than go through that again." I told him, hell, after this, I'd wrestle a bear for fun. Guess I should be more careful about what I wish for. 6 months passed. Winter came and went, burying the Cascades under a heavy blanket of snow that kept most visitors away. I welcomed the quiet, the solitude. It gave me time to think, to plan, to prepare. Spring arrived with its usual explosion of life wildflowers carpeting meadows, bears emerging from hibernation, birds returning from southern migrations. The park grew busy again, filled with hikers and campers eager to explore after months cooped up indoors. I'd managed to convince myself that what happened that day in September was a one-time encounter. That whatever that creature was, it had moved on, found new hunting grounds. The nightmares had become less frequent. The constant feeling of being watched had faded to an occasional unease. I was wrong. It started with reports from the eastern sector, damaged campsites, hikers feeling watched, strange sounds in the night. Nothing as severe as what Pete and I had encountered, but enough to set alarm bells ringing in my head. Frank called me into his office on a warm day in early May. "I need you to check out some disturbances in the eastern quadrant," he said, sliding a map across his desk. Several locations were marked with red X's. My mouth went dry. What kind of disturbances? The usual spring stuff. Probably bears coming out of hibernation getting into campers' food supplies. Frank's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes. A question maybe, or a test. I stared at the map. The marked sites formed a pattern, moving steadily west, toward the area where Pete and I had encountered the creature. "I'll go tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Frank nodded. "Take someone with you." "I'll go alone," I replied too quickly. His eyebrows rose. "After what happened to you and Pete? Not a chance. Take Morales." Maria Morales was the newest ranger, transferred in from Yosemite after Pete left. She was competent, tough, and completely unaware of what might be waiting in those woods. I wanted to protest, to insist on going alone, but that would raise too many questions, force me to explain why I was willing to face a dangerous bear by myself. So I nodded, accepting the assignment with a resignation I hoped wasn't too obvious. That night, I prepared more thoroughly than I had for any patrol in my career. I cleaned and loaded my rifle, packed extra ammunition, a more powerful flashlight, and a satellite phone I'd purchased with my own money. No more relying on Park Service radios that failed when you needed them most. I also packed something else, a small digital recorder. If I encountered the creature again, I wanted evidence, something the men in suits couldn't simply take away and classify. Morales met me at the station the next morning, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her expression alert and eager. She'd been a ranger for 5 years before transferring, and it showed in her confident movements and careful preparation. "So, problem bear?" she asked as we loaded our gear into the Jeep. "Probably," I muttered, avoiding her eyes. "We'll see." The drive to the eastern sector was quiet, with Morales occasionally pointing out wildlife or asking questions about the park's geography that I answered mechanically, my mind elsewhere. We parked at the trailhead and continued on foot, following a well-maintained path that would lead us to the first marked location. Everything seemed normal at first. The forest was alive with sound bird song, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant call of a hawk. Nothing like the unnatural silence that had preceded our encounter with the creature. The first campsite showed typical bear damage, a torn-open cooler, claw marks on a tree where a food bag had been hung, paw prints in the soft earth. I felt myself relax slightly. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe it was just a bear. But as we moved to the second site, things changed. The forest grew quieter. That prickling sensation returned to the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I found myself scanning the trees more often, my hand straying to my rifle. Morales noticed. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I lied. "Just being careful." The second campsite was different. The damage wasn't consistent with a bear. A tent had been methodically torn apart, the fabric separated at the seams rather than ripped by claws. Personal items were scattered in that deliberate way I remembered from before, as if something had examined each object before discarding it. And there was that smell, that sickly sweet odor of decay that had haunted my nightmares. "What kind of bear does this?" Morales asked, crouching to examine the remains of a backpack. "Not a bear," I said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "Then what?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I say? That I thought it was some impossible creature that shouldn't exist? That men in suits had interviewed me about it but refused to explain what it was? "I'm not sure," I said finally, "but we should be careful." Morales nodded, her hand moving to rest on her sidearm. She might not know what we were dealing with, but she was smart enough to sense that something was wrong. We continued to the third site, moving more cautiously now. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the forest had fallen completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of our own breathing and footsteps. The third campsite was the worst. Blood on the ground again. Not a lot, but enough to indicate injury. The tents were destroyed, supplies scattered. And there it was, a drag trail leading away from the camp into the deeper woods. Morales saw it too. "We need to follow that," she said, already starting forward. "Someone could be hurt." I caught her arm. "Wait." She turned, impatient. "Darren, there could be injured hikers out there. Or there could be something dangerous," I countered. "We need to be smart about this." She studied my face for a moment. "You know something you're not telling me." It wasn't a question. I sighed, releasing her arm. "Last fall, my partner and I encountered something out here. Something not natural." "Not natural?" she repeated skeptically. "It looked almost human, but wrong. Too tall, limbs too long. It moved incredibly fast. It attacked us. Pete quit because of it." The words tumbled out, sounding even more ridiculous aloud than they had in my head. To my surprise, Morales didn't laugh or dismiss me. She just nodded slowly. "I've heard stories from other parks. Things that don't match known species. Rangers and hikers going missing in areas they know well." She paused. "Most people write it off as paranoia or misidentification. But not everyone." "You believe me?" I asked, stunned. She shrugged. "I've seen enough weird shit in my years as a ranger to know the woods hold secrets, and I trust your experience more than I trust rumors about bears." Relief washed over me. "Then you understand why we need to be careful." "Absolutely," she agreed. "But we still need to check for survivors. That's our job." She was right, of course. Despite the danger, we couldn't just turn back, not if there was a chance someone needed our help. "We'll follow the trail," I conceded. "But we stay together, move slowly. And at the first sign of trouble, we retreat. Agreed?" "Agreed," Morales nodded, drawing her sidearm. "Lead the way." The drag trail led us deeper into the forest, away from established paths. Just like before, the trees grew older and larger, the canopy thicker, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. The smell of decay grew stronger. I kept the satellite phone in one hand, rifle in the other, ready to call for help at the first sign of the creature. Morales moved beside me, alert and tense, her eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "Do you hear that?" she whispered after we'd been walking for about 20 minutes. I stopped, listening. At first I heard nothing. Then, faintly, a sound reached my ears, a soft, rhythmic thumping, like something heavy being struck against wood. "What is that?" I murmured. Morales shook her head. "No idea." We moved forward more cautiously, the sound growing louder with each step. It was coming from somewhere ahead, beyond a dense stand of trees. As we approached, I could make out a small clearing. The drag trail led directly to it. The thumping sound was clear now, steady and deliberate. Morales and I exchanged a glance, then slowly, carefully moved to the edge of the clearing, staying hidden among the trees. What I saw made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood a crude structure, a framework of branches and logs lashed together with what looked like strips of fabric and other things I didn't want to examine too closely. It resembled a primitive shelter or blind, large enough for something the size of the creature to hide within. But it wasn't the structure itself that froze me in place. It was what surrounded it. Bodies. Or parts of bodies. At least 3, maybe more, in various states of dismemberment. They were arranged in a rough circle around the structure, some parts hanging from branches, others staked to the ground with sharpened sticks. And there, moving among them with that jerky, unnatural gait, was the creature. No, creatures. There were 2 of them, their pale, elongated forms sliding between trees and body parts with fluid, inhuman movements. The thumping sound came from one of them, striking a branch against a tree trunk in a steady rhythm. The other moved between the bodies, manipulating limbs and torsos with its 2 long fingers, arranging them like a child playing with dolls. Neither creature had noticed us yet, too absorbed in their macabre activities. Beside me, Morales had gone completely still, her face drained of color. "What the fuck?" she breathed, so quietly I barely heard her. I put a finger to my lips, then slowly, carefully began to back away. We needed to get out of here, to call for help, though what kind of help would be effective against these things I had no idea. We had moved perhaps 10 feet when disaster struck. Morales's boot came down on a fallen branch, snapping it with a crack that seemed deafening in the silence of the forest. Both creatures froze. Then, as one, their heads swiveled toward us, those empty eye sockets somehow finding us despite our concealment. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, one of the creatures let out that keening wail I remembered from my first encounter, and they both began to move toward us with terrifying speed. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Morales by the arm and yanking her back toward the trail. We crashed through the undergrowth, all attempts at stealth abandoned. Behind us, I could hear the creatures pursuing, their movements creating a sound like nothing I'd ever heard, a strange, skittering noise punctuated by that awful wailing. I fumbled with the satellite phone as we ran, trying to dial with one hand while keeping my rifle ready with the other. Morales ran beside me, her sidearm out, occasionally turning to fire behind us. The shot seemed to have little effect. The creatures kept coming, gaining on us with every stride of their impossible limbs. "The trail splits ahead," Morales gasped. "Which way?" I remembered the terrain from our hike in. "Left, downhill, toward the river." Maybe water would slow them down, maybe not. But it was our best chance. We veered left at the fork, the path dropping steeply toward the sound of rushing water. Behind us, one of the creatures screamed, not in pain, but in what sounded almost like frustration. The satellite phone finally connected as we ran, a voice crackling through the static. "Emergency services, what's your situation?" "Park rangers under attack," I shouted into the phone, not caring how crazy I sounded. "Eastern quadrant of Cascade Park, following Trail 27 toward Rattlesnake River. Send everyone." "Sir, can you describe the nature of the—" The connection cut off as I stumbled, nearly falling down the increasingly steep path. I shoved the useless phone into my pocket and focused on keeping my footing. The river came into view below us, swollen with spring melt, its waters churning white over rocks. The path ended at a narrow footbridge, just a simple wooden structure spanning the 30 feet of rushing water. "The bridge!" I gasped. "Get across!" Morales reached it first, sprinting across the wooden planks. I followed, risking a glance back as I reached the midpoint. The creatures had emerged from the trees. They stood at the edge of the clearing, their tall, gaunt forms stark against the green backdrop. They seemed hesitant, swaying slightly as they stared at the bridge and the rushing water below. I kept moving, reaching the other side where Morales waited, her gun aimed at the creatures. "They're not following," she said, her voice tight with adrenaline. She was right. The creatures remained on the far bank, those eyeless faces turned toward us. Then slowly, they began to retreat, sliding back into the trees with those fluid, wrong movements. We watched until they disappeared entirely, neither of us speaking. Only when they had been gone for several minutes did I let out the breath I'd been holding. "What the hell were those things?" Morales finally asked, her voice shaking slightly. I shook my head. "I don't know, but they're territorial. They mark their hunting grounds, and they're spreading." Morales holstered her weapon, her hands still trembling. "We need to report this." "To who?" I asked bitterly. "The Park Service that wrote off my last encounter as a bear attack? The fish and wildlife agents who took my evidence and disappeared? She was quiet for a moment, then said, "We can't just do nothing, Darren. Those things killed people. They're still killing people." I knew she was right. Whatever those creatures were, they weren't going to stop. Their territory was expanding, moving closer to popular trails and campsites. It was only a matter of time before more hikers disappeared, before more rangers encountered what we had. "We'll report it," I said finally. "Document everything. Pictures, coordinates, detailed descriptions. Make it impossible to ignore." Morales nodded, her expression resolute. "And if they still don't believe us?" I thought about Pete, about his decision to leave rather than face those things again. For a moment I envied his choice, the simplicity of walking away, but I couldn't do that. This was my park, my responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, I was exactly the dumbass who needed to stay and fight. "Then we handle it ourselves," I said quietly. We made our way back to the Jeep without further incident, though every shadow, every rustle of leaves made us tense and ready. I kept expecting to see those pale, twisted forms emerging from the trees, but they never did. As we drove back to the ranger station, Morales and I discussed our plan. We would make our report, as detailed and evidence-based as possible. We would insist on a full investigation, on closing the affected areas to the public, and if that failed, if we were dismissed or ignored, we would return, with more rangers, more weapons, more preparation. Because the creatures, whatever they were, had to be stopped before they claimed more victims. I'd spent 6 months trying to forget what I'd seen, to convince myself it was a one-time encounter. No more. Now I knew the truth, that there were things in these woods that defied explanation, things that were watching, waiting, hunting, and sometimes, when you're in the woods, being a dumbass who sticks around might be the only thing standing between those things and the people who have no idea what's waiting for them among the trees. Because the thing is, every once in a while when I'm out in those woods, I get that same feeling, that prickling on the back of my neck, that sense that something's watching me, waiting. And maybe, just maybe, I'm dumb enough to stick around long enough to find out what it is. Funny thing though, when Pete quit, he told me, "Darren, I'd rather wrestle a bear than go through that again." I told him, "Hell, after this I'd wrestle a bear for fun." Guess I should be more careful about what I wish for, because the bears aren't what I'm worried about anymore. It's the things that move like broken puppets, the things with no faces, the things that are watching from the trees. They're still out there, waiting. And so am I. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a cop in a small town isn't glamorous. It's not like the movies where every day is a shootout or a high-speed chase. It's mostly handling neighbor disputes over where someone's fence ends or someone's dog barking too much. My name's Lucas Giroux, and I've been wearing the badge for 9 years here in Chesterville, Louisiana. Population about 2,000, give or take. I love this town. It's quiet, peaceful for the most part, and I like that. The station sits on Main Street, a small brick building wedged between Mabel's Diner and the post office. Most days I spend my shifts driving the same routes, nodding to the same people and filing the same reports. Sheriff Daniels runs a tight ship, but there's not much to keep tight in Chesterville. We've got a total of 5 officers, including myself and the sheriff. That's more than enough for a place where the biggest crime is usually teenagers stealing beer from the gas and go. I grew up here, left for a few years to join the Army, then came back when my father got sick. He passed a year after I returned, but by then, I'd already settled back into the rhythm of small-town life. Got the job with the sheriff's department, bought a small house on Cypress Lane, and fell into a comfortable routine. My house isn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, with a small porch where I sit most evenings with a beer, watching the sun set over Lake Vere. The lake's always been the heart of Chesterville. People fish there, swim there, take their boats out on lazy Sunday afternoons. It's beautiful, but there's something about it that's always made me uneasy. The water's so dark you can't see more than a foot down, and the cypress trees that ring it cast these long shadows that seem to reach out like fingers as the day fades. Before 2013, I'd never given much thought to what might be lurking in those shadows. Alligators, sure. Snakes, definitely. but nothing that couldn't be explained by basic biology. Nothing that would keep me up at night, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds outside my window. The morning of that Thursday started like any other. I rolled out of bed at 5:30, made coffee, and sat on my porch watching the mist rise off the lake. Mrs. Thibodeau from next door waved as she collected her newspaper, and I waved back. Her husband Frank had died the year before, and she lived alone with 3 cats and a collection of porcelain angels that filled every windowsill of her house. "Morning, Officer Giroux," she called. "Gonna be a hot one today." "Yes, ma'am," I replied, raising my coffee cup in salute. "Stay cool." At the station, Sheriff Daniels was already at his desk, finishing the last of a box of donuts from Mabel's. He nodded as I walked in. "Looks like we got a call from the Perkins place again," he said, pushing a report toward me. "Their mail got stolen 3 days in a row. Probably raccoons, but you might want to take a drive out there." I nodded, taking the report. "Anything else?" "Just the usual." "Oh, and keep an eye out near the high school. Principal called and said she's seen some strange cars parked across the street after hours. Probably nothing, but worth checking." That was my day. Checking on stolen mail, driving past the high school a few times, and stopping at the Gas and Go for lunch. By evening, I was parked near the lake, filling out paperwork while listening to the radio play an old Hank Williams song. My coffee had gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, watching the last of the sun disappear behind the tree line. The radio crackled to life. "Unit 3, we got a call about a domestic disturbance, 14 miles out of town, edge of the bayou. 1545 Cypress Marsh Road. Caller didn't leave a name, just said there was screaming." I sighed, setting down my coffee. 10-4 dispatch. I'm on my way. The thing about domestic calls is, you never know what you're walking into. Could be nothing but a couple having a loud argument. Could be someone getting the hell beat out of them. Either way, it wasn't something I could ignore, even if it was at the ass end of nowhere. As I started the cruiser, I had this feeling in my gut. Not exactly dread, but something close to it. Like when you know a storm's coming before the first thunder rolls in. I shook it off, chalking it up to the cold coffee and the fact that I was missing the baseball game on TV. Little did I know that feeling wasn't just indigestion or disappointment. It was a warning, and I should have listened. The drive out to Cypress Marsh Road took longer than I expected. The main highway gave way to parish roads, which eventually turned into little more than dirt paths cutting through the swamp. My cruiser's headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, barely illuminating the overgrown vegetation that pressed in from both sides. I'd been out this way before, but not often. Not many people lived this far from town. Just a few old-timers who'd been here longer than anyone could remember, and the occasional drifter looking for a quiet place to disappear. The houses, if you could call them that, were mostly ramshackle cabins set back from the road, hidden by the trees and the constant mist that rolled in from the swamp at night. The radio had gone silent, nothing but static this far out. I tried calling back to dispatch, but all I got was a crackle of white noise. Great. So I was on my own. The address, 1545 Cypress Marsh Road, turned out to be one of those places that doesn't really have a proper address. No mailbox, no house number, just a barely visible turnoff, marked by 3 notches cut into a cypress tree. If I hadn't been looking for it, I would have missed it completely. My cruiser crawled down what might generously be called a driveway, though it was more like 2 tire tracks cutting through the undergrowth. Branches scraped against the sides like fingernails, and the headlights bounced off the dense fog that had settled over everything. The smell hit me first when I rolled down my window to get a better look. That distinct bayou scent, rotting vegetation, stagnant water, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something metallic like blood or rust. The cabin appeared suddenly, looming out of the mist. It was a single-story structure, the wood gray and weathered, the tin roof patched in places with what looked like sheet metal and tar. A dim light flickered behind curtained windows, casting moving shadows across the front porch. I parked, leaving the cruiser's headlights on to illuminate the approach. As I stepped out, my boots sank slightly into the soft ground. The night was unnaturally quiet. No chirping cicadas, no croaking frogs, none of the usual bayou night sounds. just a heavy, waiting silence that pressed against my eardrums. "Hello?" I called out, one hand resting on my holstered gun. "Chesterville Police." No response. Not even movement behind the curtains. I approached slowly, scanning the surroundings. The property was cluttered with the usual rural detritus: a rusted-out truck up on blocks, various engine parts scattered across what might have once been a lawn, a stack of lobster traps, even though we were miles from the Gulf. The porch steps creaked under my weight. Old wood, probably rotting from years of humidity. The door was solid, though, newer than the rest of the house, with a deadbolt lock that also looked recently installed. I knocked firmly. "Police. Anyone home?" That's when I heard it. A scraping noise from inside. Heavy, deliberate. Something being dragged across the floor. Then silence again. "I'm responding to a report of a disturbance," I called out, louder this time. "Open the door, please." More scraping, followed by a thud. Then what sounded like breathing. Deep, ragged breathing just on the other side of the door. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. In 9 years of police work, I'd developed a pretty good instinct for danger. Right now, every nerve in my body was telling me to get back in my car and drive away. But that's not what they pay me for. I tried the doorknob, locked as expected. I moved to the nearest window, trying to peer through a gap in the curtains. All I could make out was a dim interior, what looked like sparse furniture, and shadows that seemed to move independently of the flickering light source. Protocol said I should go back to my car, call for backup, and wait. But my radio wasn't working, and whatever was happening inside might not wait for the 30-minute drive back to where I could get a signal, then the 30-minute drive back with help. So I circled the cabin, looking for another way in, or at least a better view of what I was dealing with. The side windows were boarded up from the inside, which struck me as odd. Usually people board windows from the outside to keep others out, not from the inside to keep something in. As I rounded the back of the cabin, my flashlight beam caught something on the ground. Footprints in the soft mud. But not normal footprints. These were large, much larger than my size 11 boots, and had an unusual shape. The toe area splayed out into what looked like claws, and they were bipedal, 2 legs, not 4. My first thought was bear, but bears don't typically walk on just their hind legs for any distance. And these prints were clearly from something that was walking upright, stride after stride, leading up to the cabin's back door. The back door hung partially open, its frame splintered like something had forced its way in, or out. I drew my weapon, heart hammering in my chest. 9 years on the force, and I'd pulled my gun maybe 3 times, never fired it outside the range. But something told me I might need it now. "Police officer," I called out again, pushing the door open wider with my foot. "Anyone inside?" The smell that hit me made my eyes water. A putrid mix of decay, wet animal fur, and that same metallic tang I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now. Much stronger. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness of what appeared to be a kitchen. An old stove, a refrigerator humming loudly, dirty dishes piled in a sink. Normal, until you noticed the deep gouges in the wooden table, like something had clawed through it, or the dark spatters across the wall that looked suspiciously like blood. I moved deeper into the cabin, each step careful, deliberate. The scraping sound had stopped, but I could still hear that breathing, coming from somewhere ahead. "This is Officer Giroux with the Chesterville Police," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need whoever's here to identify themselves." A soft noise from the next room made me freeze, not breathing this time. Something else, something that sounded almost like chewing. With my gun raised, I stepped into what must have been the main room of the cabin. And that's when my world changed forever. The first thing my flashlight illuminated was blood. So much blood. It was everywhere, pooled on the warped wooden floorboards, splattered across the walls, soaked into an old couch against the far wall. The coppery smell was overwhelming now, making my stomach turn. But it was what was in the center of the room that made me stop breathing. A man, or what remained of one, lay sprawled on his back. His chest cavity had been torn open, ribs splayed outward like a grotesque flower blooming from his torso. Internal organs were strewn around him, some partially eaten. His face was mostly gone, just a red ruin where features should have been. One arm was completely severed, lying several feet away from the body. I'd seen dead bodies before, car accidents, an occasional suicide, one drug overdose that had gone undiscovered for days in the summer heat. But nothing like this. Nothing that looked like something had purposefully torn a human being apart. And then I saw what had done it. It was crouched in the corner, partially hidden by shadows, but my flashlight caught its outline. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A bear maybe, or some kind of large feral dog. But as it slowly turned toward me, I realized it was neither. The thing was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall even in its crouched position. Its body was covered in matted fur, dark brown or black, hard to tell in the dim light. But its face, God, its face. It was almost human-like in structure, but twisted, elongated, with a protruding snout full of teeth that were too long, too sharp for any natural creature. Its eyes reflected the light from my flashlight, glowing an unnatural yellow-green. It had been hunched over the man's body, and as it turned to face me, I could see blood and other matter dripping from its jaws. Those eyes locked onto mine, and I swear I saw recognition there. Not the mindless stare of an animal, but something intelligent, calculating. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. My gun was raised, but my finger was frozen on the trigger. Some primal part of my brain was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Then it stood up, on 2 legs, like a man. But no man was ever built like this, with hunched shoulders that seemed too broad for the doorframe, arms that hung down past where knees should be, ending in hands, if you could call them that, with curved claws that looked like they could tear through steel. It took a step toward me, and that broke my paralysis. I fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The bullets hit. I saw the impact, saw dark fluid spurt from its chest, but it barely flinched. It let out a noise that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a roar, but something in between, deep and resonant enough that I felt it in my chest. I kept firing, emptying my clip into the thing's upper body. It staggered slightly, looking down at the wounds in what seemed almost like annoyance. Then it looked back at me, and I swear, I saw its mouth twist into something like a smile. That's when I ran. I turned and bolted back through the kitchen, hearing it crash into furniture behind me as it gave chase. I hit the back door at full speed, bursting outside into the night air that suddenly felt clean and sweet compared to the charnel house I'd just left. My cruiser was around front, but I knew I wouldn't make it in time. The thing was fast, much faster than something of its size should be. I could hear it right behind me, its breathing heavy and wet. I veered into the trees instead, hoping to lose it in the undergrowth. My uniform caught on branches, tearing as I pushed through, but I didn't slow down. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly as I ran, barely illuminating the ground ahead of me, causing me to stumble over roots and fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear it moving through the trees with much more ease than I was, breaking branches that I had to dodge, covering ground quickly despite its bulk. I burst into a small clearing and realized my mistake immediately. I'd lost my cover, and worse, I recognized where I was. I'd run in a circle, coming back around to the front of the property. My cruiser sat about 50 yards away, headlights still on, a beacon of safety if I could just reach it. But the thing was between me and the car now, emerging from the trees with that same terrible, almost smile on its face. It knew it had me cornered. In desperation, I reached for my backup weapon, a small .38 revolver I kept in an ankle holster. Not standard issue, but Sheriff Daniels had a don't ask, don't tell policy about backup weapons. I'd never been more grateful for that than I was at that moment. The creature charged, moving with a loping gait that ate up the distance between us in seconds. I fired the revolver directly at its face, the flash briefly illuminating those terrible features in stark relief. It recoiled, letting out a shriek that sounded horribly like a human scream of pain. I'd hit it in the eye, I realized, as it clawed at its face with those massive hands. That was my chance. I ran, not toward the cruiser. It was still between me and the vehicle, but toward the cabin. If I could get inside, barricade the door somehow. I'd almost reached the porch when something hit me from behind, sending me sprawling face first into the dirt. hot breath on my neck, the weight of the creature pinning me down. This was it. I was going to end up like the poor bastard inside, torn apart, my insides strewn across the ground. But instead of tearing into me, the creature leaned close to my ear and made a sound that froze my blood more than any growl or roar could have. It spoke, not in words, exactly, but in a series of sounds that had rhythm and intent behind them, too deliberate to be random animal noises. It was trying to communicate something. Then, as suddenly as it had tackled me, the weight was gone. I rolled over expecting to see it poised to attack, but instead, it was backing away, still making those strange sounds. It reached up with one clawed hand and touched its injured eye, then pointed at me. Message received. You hurt me. I could have hurt you, but I didn't. It backed up several more steps, then turned and loped toward the tree line, disappearing into the darkness with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. I lay there for several minutes, afraid to move in case it was watching, waiting for me to think I was safe. Finally, I gathered enough courage to stand on shaky legs and stagger to my cruiser. The keys were still in the ignition. I locked the doors, started the engine, and reversed down the driveway so fast I nearly hit a tree. I didn't slow down until I reached the main road, and even then, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see that shape lumbering after me. But there was nothing there, just darkness and the mist rising from the swamp. When I finally reached an area with radio reception, I sat in my idling cruiser, trying to decide what to say. The truth seemed impossible. Who would believe me? But I had to report something. There was a dead man back there, torn apart by... what? Not a bear, not a wolf, not anything I had a name for. In the end, I made the call that would change everything that came after. Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I need backup and a medical examiner at 1545 Cypress Marsh Road. Possible homicide. Victim appears to have been attacked by an animal, some kind of large predator, possibly a bear. Not the whole truth, but enough of it that I could sleep at night. Or so I thought. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's face, those teeth, those eyes that looked at me with too much intelligence for an animal. I sat on my porch until dawn, a shotgun across my lap, jumping at every sound from the surrounding woods. The official investigation began the next morning. Sheriff Daniels picked me up himself, eyeing the shotgun I was still clutching as I got into his truck. Rough night? He asked, not unkindly. You have no idea, I replied, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. The crime scene looked different in daylight, less menacing, more pathetic. The cabin stood in a small clearing, surrounded by cypress trees dripping with moss. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze. Someone had already been out here to secure the scene. Dr. Landry, the parish medical examiner, was waiting for us. She'd driven down from the county seat, her pristine white coat already stained with mud from the property. Gentlemen, she greeted us, her face grim. I hope you haven't had breakfast yet. The body was still where I'd found it, though now covered with a sheet. When Dr. Landry pulled it back, Sheriff Daniels swore under his breath. The carnage looked even worse in daylight, more real somehow. What the hell did this? He asked, looking from the body to me. I hesitated. Like I said on the radio, some kind of animal attack. Bear, maybe. Dr. Landry frowned, poking at the chest cavity with a gloved finger. I've seen bear attacks before. This isn't it. Wolf, then? Sheriff Daniels suggested. Maybe a whole pack? She shook her head. The bite radius is all wrong. These wounds were made by something with a much larger jaw than any wolf. And these claw marks? She pointed to deep gouges in what remained of the victim's shoulders. These are unusual. What do you mean unusual? I asked, though I already knew. The spacing, the depth, they're not consistent with any predator native to this area. And look at this. She pointed to a pattern of tears in the flesh. Whatever did this was deliberate, almost surgical in places. Sheriff Daniels looked uncomfortable. So what are you saying, Doc? We got some kind of mountain lion down from Arkansas? Escaped exotic pet? Dr. Landry stood up, pulling off her gloves. I'm saying I don't know what did this. Not yet. I'll need to get him back to the lab, run some tests. While they continued discussing possibilities, I walked through the cabin, retracing my steps from the night before. In the main room, I found my empty shell casings scattered across the floor. 9 from my service weapon, 2 from the backup revolver. But something was missing. Blood. There should have been blood from the creature where my bullets hit it. I'd seen the impacts, seen fluid spurt from the wounds. But in the morning light, there was nothing. No blood trail, no sign that I'd injured it at all, except I found a single dark droplet near the back door. Not red like human blood, but almost black, with an iridescent sheen like oil on water. I called Dr. Landry over. "What do you make of this?" I asked, pointing to the droplet. She crouched down, examining it without touching. "Not human, that's for sure. Can't say more without testing it." She took a sample, carefully scraping it into a vial. Outside, 2 deputies were searching the perimeter. One of them, Mike Theriot, waved me over. "Found something weird, Giroux," he said, pointing to the ground behind the cabin. "Take a look at these tracks." They were the same tracks I'd seen the night before, only clearer in the morning light. Large bipedal footprints with distinct claw marks at the ends of the toes. They led from the back door into the swamp, eventually disappearing where the ground became too saturated to hold prints. "What the hell makes tracks like these?" Theriot asked, scratching his head. "Walking on 2 legs, but clearly not human. Bear, maybe," I suggested weakly, sticking to my story. "They can walk on their hind legs for short distances." "For short distances, sure," Theriot agreed. "But these go on for at least 30 yards that I can see. And look at the stride length. Whatever made these was booking it." Sheriff Daniels joined us, frowning at the tracks. "Get plaster casts of these," he ordered, "and expand the search perimeter. I want to know if there are more tracks or any evidence of where this thing might have gone." By midday, we had a name for our victim, Jacob Mercer, 42, ex-con, who'd done time for armed robbery and assault. He'd been living in the cabin for about 6 months, according to the property owner, who lived in Texas, and claimed he hadn't even known someone was occupying the place. No one reported Mercer missing. No one had apparently cared enough to check on him when they heard screaming. The anonymous call had likely come from a neighbor half a mile away, who just wanted the noise to stop so they could sleep. We found his wallet, some cash, and drugs in the cabin, ruling out robbery as a motive. Not that I'd suspected a human attacker anyway. Back at the station, I wrote up my report. I stuck to the facts I could explain, responding to a call, finding the victim, evidence of an animal attack. I left out the details about what I'd really seen, what had chased me, what had spoken to me in sounds that weren't quite words. Sheriff Daniels read my report, his expression unreadable. "This all you got, Giroux?" "Yes, sir," I said, not meeting his eyes. He was quiet for a long moment. "You fired 11 rounds, he finally said. "That's a full magazine from your service weapon, plus 2 from what I'm guessing was your backup piece, though you didn't mention that in your report." I swallowed hard. "I thought it was coming after me. The animal. I fired to scare it off. And did you hit it?" I don't know. It was dark." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You know what's strange? When we found those shell casings, they were all in the main room, near the body. But you said you fired to scare off an animal that was chasing you." I'd been careless in my report, too focused on hiding what I'd really seen to maintain internal consistency. "I may have confused the sequence of events," I admitted. "It was a traumatic situation." Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly. "Traumatic, sure." He closed my report. "Look, Lucas, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your daddy and I served on this force together for 20 years. I know when you're not telling me everything." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "I'm not asking for a revised report, not yet. But I want you to take a few days off, clear your head, and when you're ready, if there's anything else you want to tell me about what happened out there, my door's open." I nodded, relieved to escape further questioning. "Thanks, Sheriff." As I was leaving, he called after me. "Oh, and Lucas? We got a call while you were writing your report. Couple of fishermen were out on Lake Vere last night, not far from where that cabin sits up from the shore. Said they heard gunshots, then saw something big moving through the trees. Something they swear wasn't human or any animal they recognized." My blood ran cold. "What did they see exactly?" "That's just it," Sheriff Daniels said, his expression grave. They couldn't really describe it, except to say it walked on two legs and moved faster than anything they'd ever seen. Said it disappeared into the water. He paused. Sound like the bear you encountered? I couldn't answer. My hands had started to shake again. Get some rest, Lucas, he said, more gently now. And maybe think about whether there's a more complete version of events you want to share when you come back. I drove home in a daze, the weight of what had happened, and what might still be out there, pressing down on me like a physical thing. I'd told myself the creature was a one-off, some freak of nature that had found its way to our little corner of Louisiana. But if the fishermen had seen it too, if it was still out there. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something on my front porch. A dead rabbit, its body torn open in exactly the same way as Jacob Mercer's had been. A warning, a message, a promise that this wasn't over. I stood staring at it, gun drawn, scanning the tree line at the edge of my property. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that those inhuman eyes were fixed on me even now, waiting to see what I would do next. 2 years have passed since that night at the cabin. 2 years of looking over my shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of wondering when, not if, I'll encounter that thing again. The official report on Jacob Mercer's death listed the cause as animal attack, predator species unknown. Dr. Landry never identified the black substance I found, though she confirmed it wasn't blood from any known animal. The case technically remains open, but no one actively investigates it anymore. Just another strange occurrence in the swamps, filed away and forgotten by everyone except me. I kept the dead rabbit to myself, burying it in the woods behind my house. There have been 3 more such gifts since then, always after I've gone too close to Lake Vere at night, always left where only I would find them. Messages, I'm sure now. Reminders that it's still out there, still watching. There have been other incidents too, though none as violent as what happened to Mercer. Hunters gone missing in the swamp, only to turn up miles away with no memory of how they got there. Fishing boats found adrift, their occupants nowhere to be found. Strange noises reported on the outskirts of town, always after dark, always near water. Sheriff Daniels retired last year, but before he left, he called me into his office one last time. I've been in law enforcement for 40 years, he said, pouring us each a finger of bourbon from the bottle he kept in his bottom drawer. Seen things I can explain and a few I can't. What happened out at that cabin? He shook his head. I never pressed you for the full story because I'm not sure I want to know. But whatever's out there, it's not done. No, I agreed, taking a sip of bourbon. It's not. Be careful, Lucas, he said, his eyes serious. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. But I can't leave this one alone as much as I've tried. I've spent countless hours researching, looking for similar cases across the country, across the world. There are stories, always dismissed as hoaxes or mass hysteria, of creatures that match what I saw. Different names in different regions. Rougarou in Cajun folklore, Wendigo further north, Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest. Always described as standing upright, always with a mix of human and animal features, always with intelligence behind their eyes. Most people write these accounts off as tall tales or misidentifications of known animals. I might have too, once. But I know what I saw. I know what spoke to me in that clearing. I've taken to patrolling the lake at night, against all better judgment. Not looking for the creature exactly, but not avoiding it either. More like preparing. I carry silver bullets now, blessed by Father Mouton at St. Agnes Church, under the pretense that they're for protection against evil. I'm not sure they'll work any better than regular bullets, but the legends all mention silver, and I'm not taking chances. 2 months ago, I found tracks again, fresh ones, leading up from the lake to a campsite where a family had been staying. They were gone when I arrived, their tent shredded, blood splattered across their cooking equipment. I followed protocol, called it in as a possible animal attack, helped organize a search party. We found the parents 3 days later, huddled in a cave 5 miles away, dehydrated and confused but alive. Their 7-year-old daughter was with them, physically unharmed but changed somehow. She doesn't speak anymore, just draws the same picture over and over. A tall, dark figure with glowing eyes standing at the edge of the water, beckoning. I keep one of her drawings pinned to my bulletin board at home, next to maps marking every sighting, every unexplained event in the area for the past 2 years. They cluster around Lake Vere and the surrounding swamp, forming a pattern I'm only beginning to understand. Last week, I took a boat out on the lake after dark, against every instinct for self-preservation I possess. The water was still, unnaturally so. No ripples despite the breeze that ruffled the trees along the shore. I cut the engine in the center of the lake and just drifted, waiting. Hours passed, with nothing but the occasional splash of fish and the distant calls of night birds. Then, just as I was about to start the engine and head back, I saw it. Not the creature itself, but a disturbance in the water, something large moving beneath the surface, circling my boat. A shadow darker than the black water around it, massive, deliberate in its movements. I stayed perfectly still, one hand on my gun, watching as it completed 3 circles around me, each one closer than the last. Then it stopped, directly beneath the boat. I could feel its presence, a weight of attention focused upward. "I know you're there," I said aloud, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me, "and I know you understand me." Nothing happened for several long moments. Then, slowly, the boat began to rock, gently at first, then with increasing force, not enough to capsize me, but enough to make it clear that it could if it wanted to. A message, again. I started the engine and headed back to shore, feeling those eyes on me the whole way. I don't think it wanted to harm me. If it did, it would have done so already. No, I think it was communicating something else. A boundary, perhaps. This far, no further. The lake is mine, but that can't last. Chesterville is growing, slowly but surely. New houses being built closer to the lake, more people venturing into the swamp for recreation. Sooner or later, someone's going to cross paths with that thing who isn't as lucky as I was. Someone's going to end up like Jacob Mercer, unless I do something first. I've started gathering supplies, motion-activated cameras, stronger weapons, recording equipment. Whatever this thing is, I need evidence, proof that it exists. Not just for my own sanity, but because if others are going to protect themselves, they need to know what they're up against. Sheriff Mitchell, Daniel's replacement, thinks I'm obsessed. Maybe I am. But I was there that night. I saw what happened to Mercer. I felt that thing's breath on my neck, heard those sounds it made that were almost words, and I've seen what it's done since. Sometimes at night when I sit on my porch with a beer and my shotgun, watching the mist rise off Lake Vere, I wonder if I'm being haunted, not by a ghost, but by something more primal, more ancient. Something that was here long before Chesterville existed and will be here long after we're gone. The Bayou Shadow. That's what some of the old-timers have taken to calling it. A legend already forming around the incidents of the past 2 years, growing with each retelling. But I know it's more than a legend. I know it's real, and I know it's waiting. Tomorrow night, I'm going back out on the lake, this time with cameras, with recording equipment, with every tool at my disposal to document what's out there. It's a risk, maybe the biggest one I've ever taken. But 9 years of being a cop in a small town taught me one thing. Some mysteries don't stay buried, no matter how deep you try to put them. This thing, whatever it is, Wendigo, Rougarou, or something science hasn't named yet, it's part of Chesterville now, part of my life. And until I understand it, until I can protect my town from it, I won't be able to rest. So I'll keep watching the shadows. Keep listening for those sounds in the night that aren't quite animal, aren't quite human. Keep patrolling the edge of Lake Vere, gun loaded with silver bullets, waiting for our paths to cross again. Because that's the thing about monsters, real ones. Once you've seen them, really seen them, you can't unsee them. They change the way you look at the world, at the darkness, at the spaces between what we know and what we fear. And sometimes, if you're not careful, they change you too. I don't know what will happen tomorrow night. Maybe I'll get my evidence. Maybe I'll finally come face to face with the Bayou Shadow again. Or maybe I'll find nothing but dark water and whispered legends. But one thing's for certain. Whatever's out there in the swamp, whatever left that dead rabbit on my porch and circled my boat in the darkness, it's not done with Chesterville. It's not done with me. And I'm not done with it either.